Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Today, we're diving into a brand new story, Is It Wrong for the Strongest Tea Get Even Stronger Part 5 by Keedman Cousland. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Shakti looked at her legs in some mild curiosity, considering what she had seen, but spoke idly at the same time. Might be better to not. It didn't look bad. I care not how I look, but Lady Freya said cleanliness is something a man should keep, Otter explained simply. Guess the goddess of beauty wasn't much one for beards. Shakti would disagree, but that wasn't here or now. With what was the point now in mind again, Shakti rid herself of the small talk and instead announced, "We had a casualty. Disc. Mahout, Jelly Boy Tamer," Otter grunted. It made Shakti stare, finally asking, "You knew him?" "I keep track of many adventurers." Accepting that short claim, she instead looked upwards as she mused, "I'm really not such a good defender, am I?" She did not receive a response, not that it bothered her or she expected so. "Have you ever considered not being an adventurer, Otter?" she continued, although she didn't even look at him. "I did. I didn't particularly want to be an adventurer. When first offered a Falner at 10, I refused. Worked in the storehouse." "You got it at 14, he stated, this time making her look at him. He remained staring at the fire though. "You got it when I was still level 1 and on the first few floors." "Suppose I did, although I can't say I remember you at the time," she admitted, huffing in dry amusement at the coincidence. "I guess I was rather self-centered at the time. I didn't delay out of pain or fear. I just wasn't interested. Strength never appealed to me. If I could work in a storehouse with everyone I love and like safe, I would live a happy life. Yet, here you are." "Yet, here I am," she agreed, looking at the fire again. "My brother got a Falner. Then the next one. Then a sister. Then another brother. Then another. A sister didn't, but the next did. Then at E2, I became an adventurer to protect them. I have only ever failed," she announced quietly, long inured to the words. "Jine got his Falner 6 months after she did. Die." Shakti spat as she stabbed again and again downwards into the monster, even as others tried to pull her away. She didn't see or feel them, only seeing tears from her eyes and the pain wracking her body. A year later, an irregular infant dragon that climbed floors killed him before her. She did not level up from killing it. The next died from Wyvern. She did not level up from killing it. A Minotaur. The Goliath spawning a week early. A Vuiva. Emigration forming a pass parade. Her parents dying when dragged off in support of Zeus and Hera against the one-eyed black dragon. Even the sister who did not become an adventurer and instead worked charity was caught in an Everless attack during the Dark Ages. Then Eddie fell. None ever inspired Shakti to new heights, instead becoming chains that she carried. "But I didn't stop," she continued, bearing the weight of the memories with long familiarity. "I have found others to protect. The people of Orario. My familiar members. I have a duty, and I won't let it down. If I can protect them, nurture them, then I shall do so. My strength is immaterial, unimportant. I don't care about it." Another grunt was the only response she received. "Yet, I find the reverse here. They came down here for me, because they want me to gain more strength. They are hurting for it, striving for it, dying for it, asking it of me when I just want to scream at them." Otter finally looked up to meet her eyes. "And I'm not sure I can give it to them," she confessed, breaking the eye contact herself this time. "I tried to fight that dragon again, and yet you saw what was made of me." "You lost," he acknowledged. "And now I don't have my spear. No potions. I am wounded and exhausted, only not hiding in a hole right now because someone passing by that I can't even call a friend took pity on me." She spat, looking at her hands in anger. "And it's making me feel it. My helplessness. My fear. Not of that monster, but of more. My family is blessed with talent, one can say. For generations, the survivor has always reached level 6. All of my siblings bloomed with overwhelming potential, but I have a skill that limits me. One I gladly bear, but I fear makes level 6 impossible for me, even if they came down here just for that." Shakti was not Tsubaki or Frine. She wasn't a smith primarily, or lacking any concept of teamwork. The Ganesha familia had reached the labyrinth territory 2 years ago, and frequently fought there. It was no longer the Dark Ages, where the level 5s were trapped by Bela blocking the 49th floor. While a person leveling up was always not half as capable of being reproducible by another as many believed, one could estimate. Even before this, Shakti had been vaguely considering the idea that the reason she didn't level up was something more innate. It wasn't unusual for adventurers to hit their limits at level 4, much less 5, and Shakti had more reason than most. Enyurakti Varoda. The Vumov family had a little-known trait. Alongside Ganaputi blood, which they all inherited and boosted their own status above what their basic abilities would usually indicate, they tended to receive a certain type of skill or spell. Only the curse of their line had made Zeus and Hera so long ignore them, and many newer familiar now didn't know. Healing spells, buff spells, skills to assist others, transfer mind to another, boost magic effect, boost skills, that which made those around them better. Shakti was no different, with a skill that Lord Ganesha and her had been forced to hide since it burned itself onto her back when Jain got his Falna. Enyurakti Varoda, her own heart, increases growth and potential of those around the user, effect dependent upon affection and love felt by user, at cost of user's own growth and potential, which lowers slightly in correlation to loss and despair. All of Shakti's siblings had bloomed early as adventurers. Overflowing talent and potential obvious even from their first steps as an adventurer. Even when they were lost too, the Ganesha familiar managed. They did not care for talent as many did. Those who showed the proper will to Shakti, she ensured they advanced. The cost had never mattered. She did not care that her basic abilities were capped, or that she didn't level up as fast, that she did not gain as many skills or spells as she likely would otherwise. Yet, had the bill finally come to pay? A lifetime of losing those around her finally created a limit that she can't overcome? She had considered it before, admittedly, but it was only becoming more and more a new weight on her mind. What if I can't do it? She repeated again, not able to look at Otter. Honestly, she wasn't even sure she was talking to him anymore as opposed voicing her own fears aloud. What couldn't be said to a member of her own familia? In that role, the silent man was almost ideal. What if coming down here didn't have a point? I have never cared about being the strongest, but if I can't answer their wishes and protect them? What if Enyurakti Varoda stopped working to those the same level as her, and she couldn't help them achieve more? What if she couldn't lead them further? How lacking? Shakti's head snapped up at the response she finally received. Yet, Otter's hard eyes drilled into her to make clear he knew what he said. She instead watched as he stood, finally looming over her, his eyes remaining heavy. Then, a sword was at her throat. Shakti stiffened. She hadn't seen anything. Hadn't seen him draw his enormous blade and put it to where she could feel it against her jugular. It hadn't even been a quick draw or any sort of technique. Just a sheer gap in speed. Do you truly want to protect anyone? Otter demanded, sword in one hand. Do you have the right to claim that? He then stumped. Shakti let out a cry even as she raised her arms as protection against the air, dirt, ice, and snow flying as bad as any wind spell. Her weight was picked up, and she was sent flying even as she heard cracking and crashing of stone and ice. Yet, Shakti was not helpless. Even with the gap, she was not going to allow his words to pass without rebuttal. She had been an adventurer for 24 years, and led one of Orario's greatest familia. Despite the sudden attack, she managed to correct herself in midi and land on her feet. They dug trenches, but eventually she came to a halt in something approaching a ready stance. Otter was in no such stance, instead standing with sword in one hand and staring at her. He was standing in the remains of the hill they'd been on, the stomp having shattered the hill and made it collapse. To be able to throw away a veteran level 5 with such a casual action. Your strength is immaterial, unimportant. Are you truly so half-hearted, Ankusha? Otter demanded, merely glaring at her. I do not care if you become a storehouse attendant. I do not care if you choose to be a May police officer in Orario and never dungeon dive again. I do not have a way to calm your fears and doubts, and I wouldn't even if I could. All I know is one thing. If you decide you're going to do something, you commit yourself to it fully, Otter stated definitively, raising his blade again to point at her. If you want to be a defender who protects and nurtures your comrades, be that. Do not limit yourself in that by saying such inanity as your strength not playing a role. Do you have the strength to protect yourself here and now, Ankusha, much less your comrades? Quiet, she shouted back, even if her head drops. I know I'm not. Then fight with all your heart to change that, he said though, voice quiet and firm even against her shout. You will fail. You already know that. You are not such a blessed existence that you shall only know victory. Yet for someone who kept fighting and struggling even after losing the siblings she became an adventurer for, to fear a mere limit at leveling up dash, that is not what is happening here, she snarled. Then break your limits. Surpass yourself, Otter continued, stepping closer. His sword lowered, but he came till he once again loomed over her. Heavily muscled form standing a full head taller than her. Answer their wishes. It's not so simple. Do not confuse simple and easy. That is the path of those who have found something hard and don't want to admit to themselves that it is too hard for them to persist. Otter claimed, moving and walking past her now. I do not care about what skill you think is so limiting you. The Falna does not say all that is of worth about a person. You are the ones who decides when you stop. Face the enemy again, he said, finally stopping to look over his shoulder at her again. Claim the strength to carry whatever burden is weighing you down as a protector. Take the step to who you want to be. Don't have the audacity to stand still out of half-heartedness and claim you truly want more though. Unfortunately, Shakti was not the type to yell back at him in frustration, because that would honestly be easier. She instead looked up, acknowledging the point made. She still did not care about strength. She did care about protecting and guiding others though, and strength was a means in that. To try and disassociate them was impossible though. A facade built on hopes that strength would never be necessary for that. This flaw had shown that she could never expect that. Shakti really only had one choice before her. Keep trying or satisfy herself elsewhere. It was not easy, but it was simple. The former meant fighting, failing, and knowing her best had failed to be enough. The latter meant acknowledging, to herself, that she had become satisfied and accepted that all the losses that might have been avoided. Either way lay pain and loss, but in the end, she had already made this decision when she first got the Falna. I want to at least try saving them, even if I continue living my life as a failure, she whispered, taking a deep breath. She then called out to the retreating form. Otter, if you ever felt indebted to the Ganesha familiar, I ask one thing from you. In return, you shall see everything I can bring to bear. That made him pause, leaving. I shall not demand something as foolish as for you to never speak of this again, Shakti said even as she stood before Otter. The two of them had moved closer to where she'd tracked the dragon. Now, she met his gaze even as she raised a hand. If you speak of it, there is nothing I can do. I will just say this. If there exists any sense of comradeship between us, I ask you respect the trust one am showing you. He merely stared, matching wills against her. Forced to accept that, she explained, my spell, it allows me to transfer the skill that restrains me to another temporarily. That made Otter frown, although it did not equal Shakti's own distaste. Darpana Avimata. In practice, it was effectively a buff spell for Shakti. In reality, it was something far more shameless. Something that implied something about herself that she found ugly. Enurakti Viroda bound and limited Shakti over the losses she has suffered in her life, like chains. This spell was, at its core, seemingly nothing more than a desire for her to shed that weight and burden, to push it onto others for her own freedom. An ugly, shameful spell. Yet, she forced herself to chant, refusing to turn away. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. I look upon myself. What do I see? I look upon you. What do you hold? I cannot see myself. Let my essence flow. I see only you. Let your essence overflow. I chant to myself. Willingly I give. I chant for you. Unknowingly you receive. My cuss. My blessing. My weakness. My talent. The mirror turns. Reflections abound. It turns from me, and to you it bestows. I look not at myself, but in you be found. Reflections abound, and balance shows. Darpana Avimata. That chant. Otter mumbled. Although he was quickly cut off when it finished, the mark being emblazoned on him and no doubt feeling it. His muscles tensed before he raised a clenched hand. This feeling, I have weakened to a level 7. That is an effect of the limitation, yes, Shakti said, tired herself as she got used to the mind. That was how it functioned as a buff spell for Shakti, but so bad for others. It wasn't in fact a direct transfer of strength. It was just the absence or presence of Enurakti Viroda. Shakti became the version of herself without Enurakti Viroda. Stats and even skills boosted to where they would have without its limitations. For the other, they retroactively became bound by the skill. Artificial caps to basic abilities, and potentially even skills sealed. It didn't actually shift levels, in terms of gaining or losing developmental abilities, but losing or gaining 1 or 200 points in each stat, for each level, was almost equivalent when you are a higher level. A spell that weakened others while strengthening herself like so. There was a reason it alongside Enurakti Virata were kept secret on the surface. This skill is distinctly unpleasant, Otter then added, face stony as he obviously didn't mean the power aspect. Yes, it is unpleasant when applied to others, Shakti admitted, trying to hide her grimace. Another reason she preferred not to use it on comrades. The spell functioned off one's sense of loss and despair. When applied to others, it brought to mind the events and feelings correlating to those. People were flooded by such memories and sentiment. It must bring you a great benefit if Lord Ganesha manifested it, he commented, examining her. Gods didn't have to accept skills when updating fauna, although few were so self-destructive as to be rejected. Do you regret bearing it? Never, Shakti vowed. That she knew. This skill manifested by her own will. It was her talent, and she was glad that it had manifested to be able to help those around her. It was chains binding her, but they were her chains. Each link forged in her life. They were bitter memories of loss and despair, yes, but each was also someone she had loved and enjoyed knowing. No matter what this spell did, she would always end up being the one to pick those chains back up. But, she then looked at Otter, and bowed her head. I must apologize, however. I did not expect it to affect you so badly. I shamed myself with such thoughts. Enurakti Virata was worse for those who have experienced loss and despair. She had assumed that lone, stoic, immovable Otter would feel less from it. Put another way, she had assumed that Otter hadn't cared about many people enough to feel such things. Yet, clearly that was her own assumptions. She didn't, in fact, know much about Otter. Before Zeus and Hera fell, she knew him as little more than the queen's favorite victim. Otherwise, it made her once again remember that besides Mia, Otter was the longest-serving member of the Freya familia. From when he arrived, literally everyone in that familia but Lady Freya and Mia had been lost. I care not, he quickly declared though, taking a step back. Removing what she just noted now was her hand remaining on his chest. I have little desire to bear this for long. So, move, Ankusha. I shall be watching. Yes, of course, she said, although she shot him a look too as she considered Enurakti Virata's, which he now bore effects and mechanisms. It made her ask, is there something I can say or do to have you feel a rush of fondness and affection for me, Otter? She received a dull look in response alongside. The best way to impress me is to fight properly, over anything else. She froze as she considered her words, eventually admitting with a sigh, bad choice of words. She should focus on the challenge before her over trying to manipulate such things. I don't suppose I can borrow one of your weapons. No. Understood, Shakti said, just expecting it by this point. She braced and looked at the island before her. Maximum effort instead. Honestly, it was hard to remember the second fight against the Swordhorn Dragon. She hadn't exactly been calm and collected when she did so. Nor had she been well rested. She had simply run at the monster that had already forced her to flee once before. She wasn't sure whether she could claim to be doing anything different this time. Yet, she still approached the island. She had tracked it here the previous time. Found its lair. It had chased her when she had fled before, but it had no doubt returned. Unless it was currently on a hunting run. As she crested the icy hill surrounding a central valley, however, she found that such was not so. She stared down at the blue and white dragon, and it also stared back. Clearly, it was not as unaware as last time. With her slow approach, it had to have smelled her. It clearly hadn't felt it necessary to come meet her either, with her approaching. As it looked at her, it slowly uncoiled its body. The wounds she had inflicted largely healed, only forming new scars that decorated its body. Elixir or not, Shakti could not claim the same. Her clothes were torn, and exhaustion still permeated her body. The marking of Otter with her spell also meant her mind was already draining. Maybe most importantly, she was all but unarmed beside a small knife she had kept on her. Backup blade broken in the second battle, and her spear deflected. That thought made her eyes turn towards where she spotted her spear buried into the ice on the other side of the valley. A move caught by the dragon, which flapped its wings with new urgency. It shot into the air, hovering before her with great flaps. Then it roared, the sound echoing out. As it suddenly darted at her with horn poised to stab at her, she leapt right back. It adjusted easily, set to impale her. Shakti maneuvered her body in midi in the last several feet though, slamming her palms on the flat of its horn to launch herself just above. Hearing the whistle of the air right beneath her, she flipped to land on her feet on its horn. She then kept running forward on the length of its body, closing the distance to her spear. The entire maneuver took merely an instant, but that was enough time for it to flick its tri-bladed tail. She leaned to avoid the blade, but there was no avoiding it flicking her entire body in a new direction. She straightened, but the dragon spun shockingly fast to dart back at her. Grabbing a rock she'd put in a pocket, she threw it as hard as she could right at the approaching monster. Even traveling so fast that it could kill lower-leveled adventurers, it shattered against the monster's scales without even the slightest damage. That was not the goal, though. The throw pushed Shakti herself from an ordinary, uncontrolled drop into a far faster descent in the opposite direction. The monster adjusted, but her feet landed just barely before it could gore her. Enough time for her to duck, allowing the horn to slide right over her head and jab into the ice cliff right above her. It left her crouching right underneath, and she leapt up right as it lifted its head and easily tearing through the mass of ice that would have held a lesser creature. Her rising palm strike added to that movement, however, and the monster actually tipped back with a strangled shriek of anger, its wings flapping and moving, but not able to entirely reverse its fall onto its back. It managed to twist to land on its side, but for an instant it was down. Shakti feinted towards her spear, but its tail lashed out to slam right in front of her. The feint worked, though, as it did not react as she leapt right at it. As it used one foreleg to lift itself, that was where she struck. Thick carving knife in hand, she stabbed it right through the wing membrane. "Yah!" she then yelled as she ran up its wing, gripping the knife so hard it hurt her hands. Legs pumping as in an instant she closed the distance to its actual arm muscles, cutting a deep rent in the thick membrane. Finally, the blade connected with its muscles. She heard the crack of the blade as it connected. Instead of faltering, she pushed through, till the blade shattered, and the head of the dragon came around to bite at her exposed form. She jumped right at its mouth, spinning for her feet to land first. She could feel time slow, watching as her feet and legs approached its fanged mouth while it closed, more than ready to cut her body right in half. Her feet planted on a tooth, and she jumped off it as the mouth closed. The calf and foot of one of her legs came out bloody from a fang slicing open her skin, but the mouth closed audibly just an instant too slow, and the jump put Shakti moving right towards her spear. She landed so hard her legs hurt, not having the time to move at anything but her highest speed. She was disoriented from the rapid maneuver and shift in position, but she didn't have time to collect her position. She grabbed her spear, but didn't have time to take any proper stance. All she had time for was to turn and swing as the dragon surged right at her, deflecting the horn. But then its entire body slammed into the ice cliff, and both her and the monster emerged on the other side. It unbothered by the impact. She, ignoring the pain and barely avoiding the worse even as she unleashed a withering series of strikes against its head. Even as the entire cliff of the valley was broken and they burst out closer to the shore, neither of them stopped. The crash of the ice cliff shattering echoed alongside the enraged bellows of the dragon. It made someone perk up elsewhere, having been agonizing over where their missing captain had gone. Its head was too heavily armored, and its horn would take more strength than she could offer to break it and different weapons than she had available. She juked around its head and darted towards its wing, but it answered quick. It spun to first try and strike at her with the spikes on its wings. Her spear was in position, but she didn't all for it. She instead lowered her center of mass even as she sped up, slipping under wing. This left her racing right at the tail that was following its wing, ready to smack her dreadfully if she had used the chance to attack the wing. Instead, she was a step ahead. "Hi-ah!" she yelled as she thrust the spear right into the meat of its tail right before that bladed club at the end, the scales shattering and blood flying as it sunk deep. That wasn't enough, though. Even as the momentum of the tail was still coming at her, she threw the rest of her body behind it. The tail finally slammed into her, and she was launched backwards dozens of meters back in an uncontrolled tumble that broke and shattered ice and rock. Yet, the swordhorn dragon roared too. The spear had sunk deep into its tail, and the way it came out was little better. All the force transferred to her had aided in tearing the spear and its bladed head out. It turned to where she had fallen, but in here it was a moment too late. The experience of 2 battles having informed it of many things. Experience that now betrayed it, as Shakti recovered a moment too fast and moved a sliver too fast. It failed to see Shakti use a nearby cliff as a jumping platform at its side, allowing her to go around it as opposed to straight at its head. Primarily, aim at its tail from a sideways position. Shakti spun her spear as she flew right over the tail, the spinning spear slicing through the top quarter of its tail like it was a slicing weapon. The monster roared again as it now spun to face Shakti. She had not come out unscathed from that blow. An arm of her coat had been torn off, her hairline was bleeding, and her arm hurt to even move. Yet, finally, the monster was properly harmed too. It moved differently now, keeping its wounded tail behind it. A hair more hesitation in its movement. This is the third time, Shakti gasped out, spear held out behind her as she stared down the wounded dragon. The first two haven't been for nothing. The first fight had shown how hard its scales were, how little the others were able to damage it. It revealed that the wings were far less fragile than they looked. The second fight had shown her own limitations, how little she was able to damage it, the immense strength of its main horn, how it could absorb blows to set up harder blows. Yet, they had also revealed to her several weak points, like the tail itself right under the club. The way its spikes protected soft points, making every strike at them inches from injury and death. And now, with Dharpana Avamutta active and a firm resolve to do whatever is necessary to bring this down, she could reach them. This time, she gasped out, taking a new stance. I shall win. As if responding to the declaration, the monster breathed inwards. Her arm shot out, throwing the spear right into a previous cut on its face, making it flinch. Just long enough for her to dash backwards. Its roar that landed like a blow to disorientate stabbed at her ears, but not enough. Not enough to prevent her jumping off a rock to rocket right back at it. A picked-up rock was tossed as she flew, connecting with the shaft of her spear and making it come out spinning. She grasped it out of the air and struck the monster in its moment of vulnerability. That's definitely an angry monster. A big one, Rihanna declared as the Ganesha expedition ran closer. Not with a second one nearby either, based on lack of response. It's sis, Ilta exclaimed as she led the group. She came out here to fight. Why did she come out alone? Anais demanded. Isn't it obvious? Ilta said as she laughed and proclaimed. To have an adventure. Finally, they reached the island the roars were coming from. They were on the opposite side though, and had to leap and jump over the snowy hills and ice cliffs. The noises of battle grew louder with every one though. Big sis, that's. Zenz let out as they moved. Ilta followed his gaze, seeing a large figure on the hill they were heading to. The form unmistakable to anyone with any sense of Orario's top levels. Otter of the Freya familiar. The king. Right where they were heading. Ignore him, Ilta merely snapped, deciding to treat the man as the statue he seemed intent on imitating half the time. We find and help, sis. So, with that, they alighted on the hill a short distance away from Otter. He didn't acknowledge their arrival. It made it easy for them to look down at the battle occurring. It's Captain, Dench said. Let's help her. I recognize that monster too. She's injured. We need to dash. Stop. That made them all halt. It was soft-spoken, and had no power behind it in any way that one could point to. It was instead their minds making the connection, making them turn towards Orario's mightiest adventurer. Otter still didn't look at them, instead speaking softly. Just watch. She's fighting. Trying to make something special happen. Be privileged you are here to watch. With those words, they were only able to look down at their captain. They watched as she moved as fast as they ever saw her. So much of the elegance and control she usually had lost, but none of the effectiveness. She dodged blows by the tiniest of margins, jumped into minuscule gaps and opening, thrust and swung her weapon with complete focus and determination to strike true. When she took blows, she moved even as those watching flinched and cringed. Shakti Vamal was playing the deadliest of games for adventurers, walking a tightrope with doom waiting her on either side if she slipped up. It was a sight that every true adventurer knew. Shakti gasped, but her lungs remained bereft of air to such a degree dark spots danced in her vision. Her arms blocked, even as she felt the bones cracking and fingers dislocating. Her body twisted and bent, deep pains in her torso crying out with each one. Eyes were peeled for the slightest hint of incoming attacks and gaps to attack, despite sweat and blood flowing into her eyes. Yet, she kept moving, kept jumping and dodging, kept attacking, kept watch over this enemy as it bled and cried in pain just as much as she. The dragon was irate, snarling in pain as its own wounds accrued, managing to wear down Shakti, but incapable of finishing her off. It was clearly too much, and it dug its head into the ground. Horn buried again, it started spinning. Bringing up the storm of thrown ice and snow, it also sparked with the red energy. The energy built up, eventually causing the storm to blow outwards. Shakti was dancing back, having expected this. There was no avoiding the red energy that lingered and burned, but she avoided the ice that threatened to freeze her over. Just barely. She then jumped, and the dragon burst out, having launched itself in a swift glide forward to try and bowl her over. Shakti's leap put her level with it. Its horn lashed out, but she deflected it. Not only that, but she also used it to push herself to the side. The momentum of the dragon then pushing it past her, leaving her level with its wing. Specifically, the wing wounded earlier. Her spear thrust again, and the dragon shrieked as it tipped. One wing finally fully failing. Shakti was smashed out of midair, but the dragon tumbled too. It crashed into the ground, and limb flailing out as it tried to correct itself. Knowing she couldn't allow itself to correct itself, Shakti moved even as her body cried for a moment's rest and blood erupted from her chest. She ran, but she was too slow. She knew that. Instead, her mind shifted to the on option available. Her arm drew back, and she threw her spear again. It impacted a cut at the dragon's neck, making it recoil and screech again just long enough for the red energy to fade. "Heh, got you," Shakti let out, almost tipping and falling over but managing to catch herself. Never let your enemy know your tricks. She wasn't sure what that energy was, but she had been able to see how it was used. A rush of potent defense. It was clearly a short-term power though, and demanded recovery afterwards. After all, the first time it had used the created opening to consume food. As for the second, it had been this energy that pushed Shakti into fleeing. Yet, against a flying enemy, that she had escaped at all was indicative of something, that it hadn't the energy to pursue. Yet, as the dragon turned to glare at her, she noted that her spear remained stuck in its neck and she was now unarmed against a monster. It lunged, and she danced out of the way. "Captain!" Shakti recognized that voice, which together with instinct made her reach out grab what was approaching. It allowed her to snatch an axe out of the air. Ligon's axe. "Kill that fucking lizard," his voice roared out. Shakti could only react on instinct. She ducked the wing stirk it unleashed, and blocked the following tail strike with the axe. With the far larger weapon, she tilted it to deflect the tail above her. Her feet were buried in ice from that, but she jumped after it. Made the axe come down on the already injured and partially cut tail. The axe dug into the ground, and the severed tail landed right beside it. The response of the dragon was instinctive, and Shakti had to abandon the axe to dodge the furious bite of the dragon at its crippling. "Captain, here. We got you. Don't stop." Yet, her familiar members watching kept throwing their own weapons at her. She grabbed each one and attacked the dwindling dragon. Veta's spear went into its other wing. Grain's shield blocked a blow. Lediko's spear dug right into its body. One blow after another, Shakti barely able to think enough to do more than use each offering as best she could. The dragon was releasing chilling air from its body that threatened to freeze her. It was too little too late though. Shakti could barely feel her body, and every scrap of ice forming on her skin was broken without care of tearing skin. She was on the edge of mind down, but that didn't matter. This was all instinct. Intent on answering the calls coming down at her and beating this foe before it could bring tragedy. She rolled to avoid a desperate bite of the dragon, and used that to get close enough to snatch her own spear. She pushed it deep, trying to pierce all the way through its neck. The cracking instead came from her spear though, as the shaft finally gave way under its punishment and broke off. Shakti kept moving. The bottom shaft of her spear in hand, she darted and grabbed a discarded axe in the other. She leapt, slamming it into the dragon's body. Dislocated fingers gave in, and her grip on it failed. Yet, she moved instinctively and slammed the pole of her spear into the axe to push it in just a bit deeper. It finally granted her what she needed. The flash of shining blue underneath torn flesh and red blood. Its magic stone. She ducked a desperate bite. She dipped as it tried to catch her with its horn. She dodged as it spun. She then jumped, arcing over it. The blunt shaft of her spear held in her good hand, ready to slam it down on the exposed magic stone as the dragon proved too slow. "Ankusha," a new voice broke in though, finally making her look away as it wasn't one of her familiar members. Her eyes met Otter's. Pulling one of the spikes from his waist, he tossed it at her with a simple order. "Try this." Shakti reached out with her injured hand, catching the spike in her palm. Broken and dislocated fingers grasped around it. They could barely hold it, but she could still use it to direct the spike into position. Its sharp end cracked against the magic stone, and then the broken shaft of her spear came down on it like a hammer and nail. The spike broke open the magic stone. An explosion of dust occurred, cutting off the indignant, defiant roar of the dragon instantly. Those outside could only see for a moment the cloud of ash and smoke that formed afterwards. Yet it died down to reveal a dark form walking out. Shakti's form walking out, steps uneven and wobbling, but victorious. "Sis!" Ilta called as she jumped down. The cry of others joined as they jumped down to surround her. "Everyone," she merely said, looking over them with a firm gaze even as she looked half dead. "Prepare to leave the dungeon. We are done here." After that and before her form, there was only one response they could think of. "Yes, Captain." She looked up to see that Otter had already disappeared. It wasn't necessarily pleasant, but she still whispered as they set off, "Thank you for helping me try to make it worth it." For now she had done her best. And the need to continue doing that in the future wasn't going to disappear. Man, basically a month since my last update. Sorry about that. Between finals, a sickness, and this chapter not coming easily. Still, hope to get a few more out before next semester starts on the 16th. Also, for those of you keeping up on newly released Volume 20, in addition to having to add a centipede venom dragon to the 67th floor, I have a question for you. It has been theorized that Leon Vardenberg's magic spells trials reference the names of Zeus Hero executives. If true, this makes Regnant seemingly refer to the Hero captain. Likely meaning Regna or something of that nature was her name. I used Syria for her name in this AU. What do you think her name was? And should I substitute Regna, or whatever someone else comes up with, in and replace all the Syrias? Hope you enjoy a bit of a calmer chapter with more plot and interactions over battles. Hazik Safri, bit hard to date the Freya episode plot. The Dan Memo video has her sort of talk about I'd spend days tormenting Otter, observing my children, and tormenting Otter again. Fun days, with nothing to be changed, etc. I found that boy. Seems to indicate there was some time between that and Bell. Don't have LN version to see what that says. I'll likely treat it as happening right before Otter's level up, although not certain. I do intend some out of Orario arcs, with Freya leaving too, but not sure an already laid out arc where the Freya XX are specifically just stalking and lurking is what I want. Do like Ari though, and possible I'll change my mind. Torres Juan 010, thanks for both reviews. Appreciate it. Glad the dungeon parts are landing. Danmachi has so much room to show there, even if plenty of arcs focus entirely on surface affairs. And yeah, how Otter is perceived and how he interacts with others is a big part of this story. He's pretty mysterious, or just straightforward obsessed, in canon, but we see times when he just acknowledges and helps, Mikoto, Bell, AIS, others. He's also a guy fine with walking away without elaboration though. This is chance to have similar such acts spiral into actual interactions ****. Shakti is just one of first, turning distant acknowledgement of trust into something closer. Freya's reaction, hard to guess. She's whimsical, to say the least. Even she probably doesn't know how she feels about something till she sees it. And 10 to 20k for me? Depends on what I write. Dialogue is often harder for me, while battles faster. Most my chaps take most of a dedicated day and change, with some a bit more broken up with parts written over several days. For your second review, just in time. No, Shakti is basically AU here as canon gives us little about her. I like her though, and really wanted to expand upon her to explore things like her 7 dead siblings and being the captain of the familiar with most first class. Anyurakti Varoda felt like threading the needle. Once again, glad on dungeon fight. Monsters as a variety of challenging environments create tense battles. Who knew? 4 Otter's interactions. While he rages against sullying Freya's honor and has pride as a representative of her, otherwise he is utterly lacking in jealousy and acknowledges true effort of others. So, he is very liable to help to those who display such. He rises in a world with many growing adventurers. In my head canon, Otter would be far stronger in a world where Zeus Hera didn't fall. Although, he isn't particularly a good teacher. Inexperienced, at least. I hope he starts getting closer to more people, like Sakti, although trying to avoid forcing too much. Yeah, you can contact me. Do have this on QCand SB that make responding easier, but PMs here are also fine. Obviously, I like talking Danmachi. Another roar of a Valgang dragon was cut short by Otter's blade cutting through its neck, head falling first onto the ground only to be quickly followed by its heavy body. Otter was more concerned, however, with his broadsword, or its remains. Finally, the wear and cracks that had been accumulating in the glacier territory reached the critical point when put against the scales of the Valgang dragons. The first half that scattered with the strike was joined as the bottom half crumbling before his eyes. That left only his war hammer, a single of his dual blades, and a single spike remaining of the assortment of weapons he had descended with. Throwing away the worthless hilt, Otter looked up. More monsters were approaching. Wyverns and other flyers in the air, and lumbering Vangang dragons. He had already ravaged the area around the stairs, but the 58th floor was not so easily cleared. After all, even Otter had been stalled on this floor for years. Both monsters and the dungeon also had a predatory instinct to weaknesses and opportunities, like a weapon shattering. Of course, he didn't need to eliminate them. He could easily reach the stairs with his speed. The large bag on his back was already filled with materials and drops from deeper, so more were unnecessary. These monsters just weren't worth the extra effort and time from him anymore. Yet, he considered who he had left on the 59th floor. The Ganesha Familiar. They had managed to reach it. True, they had to use twice the numbers as his fellow executives under Lady Freya. They had also been in over their heads, bunkering down yet till quickly worn down and depleted of supplies and energy. Looking at them, they were far from impressive or inspirational. They had still done it, with only level 5s too. That had to be acknowledged. If they had done so a month ago, they would have shamed himself, his familiar, and the Loki familiar. While that possibly said more about how things had been a month ago. Humph, he grunted to himself, reaching back and grabbing his war hammer. In acknowledgement of you brave warrior of the elephant god. In honor of your baptism, Ankusha. Otter's legs tensed, and the next thing the lead monster saw was Otter in midair before it with war hammer drawn back. The impact was laced with numerous cracks and crunches as scales and bones shattered, monster letting off belated cry as it toppled and struggled on the floor. I'll tear open a slight opening for you, he said aloud as he landed again. He proceeded to decimate the enemy on the 58th floor. He then started up the stairs, taking care to clear the way more than he needed to. The dungeon would fill in the void left behind, but the dungeon did have a limit. If the Ganesha Familiar started their ascent soon, the effect would be noticeable. If they took too long, well, then they'd have to forge their own path. By the 53rd floor, he came to a halt around a corner as he listened to a familiar voice. Remember, we're splitting into 2 groups. I'll lead the former in Loki Familiar. Guess passing by and operating in the same area was inevitable, since expeditions took longer and longer the deeper they went. Otter merely started moving again. Their presence meant he could turn entirely to ascending. He had weakened the path enough for the Ganesha Familiar and the Loki Familiar inadvertently, so they could rely on their own merit and each other from now on. No longer needing to delay or distract himself, he sped up even further. Loki Familiar was easy enough to avoid on the floor proper. It was a surprise to find they hadn't left a camp on the 50th floor safe zone, but that was hardly something Otter would dwell on himself. Just cleared the way from an unnecessary meeting in the dungeon. The 49th floor proved interesting, however. The Moitora yet remained unrested. Canyon, craters, and shattered ground remained. Few monsters too. The failure of the dungeon to repair it was still not an immediate concern, but still worth noting. Nothing else was the same. The volcano territory was passed over same as before. While his time in the dungeon ensured he wasn't fresh, he was not in such a state that he couldn't run right over the monsters in his way the same as when he descended. Floors passed fast. The volcano territory. The White Palace. The dense forest ravine. The water city. It was only in the large tree labyrinth that his run came to a halt, taking time to breath and consider. He was returning to the surface. While obviously anything here was utterly inferior to what he was already carrying, that was not the only concern that needed to be met. He quickly spent a bit of time finding and collecting herbs through his sharp eyes and nose before he started up again. After that, he only stopped on the 18th floor. He ignored Rivera, having no need for it. He instead used the pools there to wash up properly to uphold Lady Freya's standards on cleanliness before surfacing. After that, it was only as he exited the dungeon stairs that he slowed again. It immediately led to the eyes of those adventurers coming and going and guild members supervising focusing on him. He felt their curious and awed gazes, as well those more calculative that looked at his limited weapons, worn outfit, and full bag on his back. Otter ignored them, even as his own senses and instincts sorted through them subconsciously. At least, till one of the guild members, Archienthrope he recognized as one of the high-ups, came forth and forced himself to speak even as Otter's eyes silently moved to him. Sir Otter. The guild received news from the Freya executives that the 59th floor had been reached, and you went deeper. If possible, we would like to note what floor you have reached. Otter considered ignoring them entirely, but eventually judged it worthy of stating, I reached the 66th floor before turning back. Surrounded as they were by adventurers of varying status, It was only natural that this was heard and soon being repeated everywhere. Ignoring it once again, Otto was instead stopped as the guild member spoke again. The 66th. We received orders from Oranos for your return, sir. Otto was not pleased by the request seemingly straight from the god restraining the dungeon, but he still accepted it stoically. He was at the Parthenon, the guild headquarters, now. He had been led to and subsequently left alone in a room on the second floor clearly meant for private and confidential meetings compared to the exchange on the first floor. Otto remained standing, eyes closed, while waiting. Although, those who attempt to sneak up on me receive no mercy, he rumbled out suddenly. A moment of silence followed before a voice spoke up. Worry not, champion of Freya. This one is a fool, but not such a fool as to invite the enmity of Goddess Freya, the Freya Familiar, or yourself. Otto opened his eyes to glare as invisibility faded to reveal a figure in a black cloak. You show yourself before me finally, instead of watching and hiding, Otto remarked. I have had little reason to bother you, the figure claimed, voice odd in a way that made his ears twitch. The figure chuckled before adding, if also with reason to keep an eye on you. Otto didn't shift or react. He instead stared silently at the figure. He did not know who this was, but that also meant he had no need to humor them. Not even apparently being a guild member changed that. I am Fels, a former mage of Altina and a silent ear to the great god Oranos. The figure spoke, the lack of a discernible heartbeat and odd voice making it hard, but not impossible, to identify the fear in the voice. The guild is interested in hearing of your exploration of the glacier territory and correlating it with our own information. We shall know. Use that to assure ourselves of what? I shall not share what I discovered, Otto repeated, uncaring. But it would be helpful to all to discover if the dungeon shifted these floors in 15 years of being isolated, Fels claimed, voice raising. And that changes nothing, Otto countered immediately, merely staring. What obligation do I owe the guild over information on the floors when it is not returned? Fels had no immediate response to that. Not when both of them knew that the guild had specifically hidden information on the secret floors after the fall of Zeus and Hera. While partially for the morale of newer adventurers who they decided did not need to know how Orario was still recovering its previous strength, it was not solely for that. They had also refused to release the information on said floors to the top familiars. Like the Freya Familiar. It was one more reason the 58th floor had been the limit for so long. Unknown monsters and unknown floor layout lay beyond what was already a point when stamina, supplies, and weapons were strained. Even Otto had been reliant on information learned secondhand from before 15 years ago. Fels was slow to respond, even if he then did in a reasonable tone. The intent was always to release our information, of course. We merely believed the exploration of the glacier territory would proceed best if the Freya and Loki familiars came to cooperate and you should have always expected adventurers to have forged their way regardless, Otto said, walking past the cloaked figure to the door. I and the Freya familiar will only tell what we have learned by our own desires or by order of the goddess. Do not assume anything from us. Otto did not desire conflict with the guild, but only one person could demand anything of their familiar. Any belief otherwise was best squashed. So spoken, none stood in his way as he left. While the sojourn to the Pantheon actually put him further from Folkvangr than Babel, it hardly was an issue. Jumping onto the roofs to avoid any further looks, he was soon closing the distance in no time. Careful footwork and choice in jumping ensured that he didn't damage the roofs as he passed. It allowed him to soon reach the walls of Folkvangr. Ignoring the temptation of clearing the walls, he alighted before the gate and said to himself solemnly, I have returned, Lady Freya. He then opened the large gate to move through. He immediately had to deflect a spear strike as fast as the wind with a hand, making him glare and rumble. Alan. Bastard, the cat-person vice-captain of the familiar said, glaring. I overlooked you all attacking me the last time, as Lady Freya handled that. Otto spoke, eyes narrowing and body tensing. Do you believe I shall allow you to continue bothering her? I'm the one removing a nuisance, Alan hissed. He quickly yelled. Who the hell did you invite to visit her? Heh? Believe it. I tried to finally get her off her ass, and she only goes to you, a new voice said, clearly approaching only to break out in an accusation as they rounded the corner. What are you and Freya planning to do with Hestia? Now being accused by the divine smith on one side and Alan on the other, Otto could only stand there. He had been attacked coming out of the dungeon, and understood that. He had not been so accused coming out of the dungeon though, and he didn't understand. Phew, You got some of the good stuff, Tilda. Who? And it's amusing how you choose to drink the good stuff. Otter had seen many things serving as Lady Freya's attendant. So, he was surprised by little. Nor did he presume to judge Lady Freya. He did, however, have to acknowledge that he did not know how to react to some things. This was one such sight. Lady Freya laid out on long chair, wine in hand and cheeks flushed just enough to indicate she had imbibed some already. Also with her was another goddess. One he recognized. Goddess Hestia, who he had met when he approached the divine smith before he dived. She was roughly the same. Hair still in twin tails, and same dress. She was also more than a slight bit intoxicated. In fact, she was drinking a bottle of fine wine from Lady Freya's collection straight from the bottle. Sprawled out in a less dignified pose than Lady Freya, she had the bottle held straight in the air as she drank. TCH, how low class, Alan spat. Hey, don't say that. I am perfectly C-classy, the goddess declared, pointing unevenly at Alan. I'm just enjoying myself. It appeared that Hestia had shown up at the gates 3 days ago. Usually the Einherjar intimidated visitors away, but many were spending more time in the dungeon. That had also proven a day when Lady Freya came out due to lack of entertainment. The result was seemingly the two drinking and relaxing. Most of the executives left grinding their teeth at Hestia freely called for food and drink from Lady Freya's handmaidens and attendants. Her shift now allowed Otter's own great size to catch her attention. Oh, hey Tilda. I remember you, OTT, odd, big guy, she said as her hand now turned to him. Otter, you've returned successful, I hope, Freya commented, sipping at her own wine. I have, Lady Freya, he said as he gave a slight bow. Oh, yeah. Otter. I totally knew that, Hestia said as she stood and pranced closer till she could pat his stomach that was level with her face, declaring, Got to thank you. That invitation was well timed. Am I touching a stone wall or are those really your abs? Also, are you really this tall? It feels like I'm practically face to face with your dash as Hestia got distracted trying to find the trick while muttering freely and Otter didn't know what to say. It was Hephaestus that facepalmed and groaned out. Just a few days with Freya, and you're already like this. Are you really a virgin goddess? Oh, hey, it's Heffy, Hestia said as she pointed at the divine smith, wide grin on her face even as she continued feeling up Otter's stomach. Oh yes, wonderful to see you, Heffy. Lady Freya commented, smiling and enjoying using the nickname. Do you wish to join us? Tilda, yes, Tilda. Join us, Hestia started cheerfully, only to freeze. Suddenly, she was crouching behind and clutching Otter's leg as she hissed. No. I almost forgot. You kicked me out. Leave, get out Tilda. Unless of course you came here to apologize, Hestia now said, springing right up with seeming absolute confidence as she looked smugly at the divine smith. Absolutely not, Hephaestus retorted, leading Hestia to once again crouch behind Otter's leg and start hissing. In fact, really, Hestia, did you really internalize nothing of what I told you? You kicked me out, Hestia reiterated, pouting. I spent a night on the streets till I remembered this invitation. And so over actually listening to me and figuring out how to handle yourself, you did what? Run to Freya's and play around for 3 days straight. Annoying as fuck, Alan muttered. Hephaestus ignored the always acerbic adventurer though, merely continuing while waving her hands. You're not even friends with her like me, so where do you get off? It's too risky to get in her debt. You don't even like her. Hey, Freya let out as Otter and Alan's gazes sharpened. I don't dislike you, Hestia quickly said, now nervous. She gestured to Freya, emphasizing, you're just a whole lot of that. Oh, I don't care about that, Freya claimed instantly, however, waving it away. She instead looked at Hephaestus as she continued, and that Hestia doesn't like me is half the reason I like her. No, why is it dangerous for her to come to me? Do you think I so wicked? When 'tis you that threw her onto the streets? That's right, Hestia said, nodding in agreement. Don't try to kid with me, Hephaestus retorted firmly though, not backing down before either goddess or the looks of two adventurers. We both know your whim is uncontrollable, and it will eventually catch Hestia up in it. Says the one that put her out now. Yeah, she's right, Hestia crowed again, pointing at Hephaestus. She then turned to Otter and started poking her leg as she continued. Hey, Otter. You're big and strong, right? Take her out. Do it. Oh ho, that would indeed be amusing to see, Freya huffed. The divine smith turned to him with one eye sharp, warning, don't. Otter stared for several moments, then consciously controlled his lips to smile. His hand reached out, grabbing the back of her collar and effortlessly lifting her off the ground. Her eyes remained locked with his, daring him to continue this act. Unfortunately for her, Otter was more than willing to bear her ire for the chance to finally get one up on the divine smith. I didn't really think you'd actually try to do it, Hestia said, facade clearly breaking down. She's not, you don't actually have to do that. Yes, Otter, you don't actually have to do it, Hephaestus said, smirking at him again, once again triumphant. Otter had to hold back an irritated growl. A few minutes later, the three goddesses were sitting at a table with Otter and Horn serving as attendants, Alan refusing and merely leaning against a nearby wall. And Hestia was drunk sobbing. Why did you do that, Hephaestus? She whimpered out, clearly still more than a bit tipsy. I spent the night on the streets, and it was cold and all sorts of things. It's called showing you what will happen if you intend solely to live off someone else, Hephaestus explained coldly, arms crossed and eye closed to not allow the crocodile tears to affect her. I told you for months, and it did nothing. I even let you stay longer than planned because things got crazy. You were going to kick me out earlier. Yes. But it was cooled. It's spring, so you would survive. You are speaking a bit rough, Hephaestus, Freya now noted, giggling. I'm sure a lighter touch is possible. You do not know Hestia, was the immediate retort she received. She's as hard-headed as anyone. I allowed her to relax for several months since she's usually a workaholic in heaven and just descended, but I forgot that she's a workaholic because she's a NEET. I am not. You are, Hephaestus shut down, sending Hestia a look that drew an eep. You tended the sacred flame so diligently because you didn't want to go outside and deal with trouble from the other gods. Now, with no flame to tend, you'll hide away and idle till you get kicked out. Freya, you should be thanking me as you'd likely have had her bumming around here for months. Alan gagged in disgust. Oh, that might have been kind of fun. I don't get many visitors in Folkvanga, Freya mused, clearly thinking differently. Wait, so I can stay. Hestia burst out, slamming her palms onto the table and then sending a smug smirk at Hephaestus. What counteroffer do you have, Heffy? Otter hummed in his throat, wondering when this had become a bidding war. Clearly it wasn't though, as Hephaestus responded bluntly. I offer a job and a throwaway property I picked up several years ago and is still abandoned. I don't want either of those things. Well, of course she'll pick up a job, Freya remarked with a finger to her cheek cutely. I'll what? Glad we agree on that, Hephaestus said, calming slightly at that. If one doesn't have a familiar to support them, it's only natural they have to work. I mean, I never had to, but that doesn't mean I don't understand the principle, Freya continued in a reasonable tone, besides when teasing. Although here she sent a look at the redhead. I believe I know just the perfect place for her to work, however, and I don't see why she can't stay here. No, she needs to find her own job, and she definitely isn't living here. It's far too dangerous. Oh, are you implying something about my familiar? Yes, and also something about you. Fine, I'll arrange her job and she can live with you. Eh? And I have visiting rights. Not what I was saying about. I don't want her. Rude. Okay, I know some people with townhouses that could rent a room to her. You mean your worshippers? Hardly better. She lives away from you. Besides an occasional protest, Hestia largely just looked worryingly between the two. At least till she looked at Otter and asked in confusion, when did I become the child in a custody battle? Otter did not quite know what she meant, so he merely let out another rumble from his throat as a response. Finally, Lady Freya nodded in satisfaction and said, I believe that is acceptable. I shall arrange her a job. And she'll live on the property I am offering, the goddess of the forge finished off. It made Hestia once again protest. Hey, don't I get choice in this? And the abandoned property again. No, you don't, Hephaestus answered bluntly. A goddess that lacks a familiar has no choice but to accept the generosity of those around her. Hey, I tried. I asked an elf to join my familiar, but they only asked how many members I had, what resources were available, and a bunch of stuff like that. Hestia protested and quickly explained, pouting. They walked right away when I said I didn't have a familiar or a home yet. Quite natural, no, Freya remarked. It is, yes, Hephaestus agreed, looking at Hestia severely. If you don't have applicable divine skills to entice adventurers, most deities start their familiars outside Orario. Or if you'd bothered recruiting when I allowed you to live with me for months, You could have offered some housing, and I would have been open to negotiations for some of my children to escort any newbies. You are in your current position because you didn't do anything until I made you, which only reinforces why I had to kick you out. Ah, so mean Tilda, Hestia declared, only to now turn and send watering eyes towards Otter. They are being mean. Otter, you're super strong, right? And this familiar is super rich and strong, right? You have to be able to help me. Introduce me to some super strong but also super humble and desperate adventurers. Do those exist? Horn whispered from the side. Otter was rather baffled too. He hadn't been asked such before. For good reason too. While he was willing to acknowledge fellow adventurers and go out of his way at times for the sake of that acknowledgement, he had no reason to aid another familiar in growing from the wider perspective. Adventurers should concern themselves with their fellow adventurers, and leave the deity business of familiars to the deities. Not even being a familiar captain changed that. Plus, he hardly knew this deity, and she was only turning to him because Lady Freya and the Divine Smith had come to an agreement she didn't like, and she was searching for any allies. Except by the order of Lady Freya, the only reason I would have to aid you would be if you became an allied familiar, Otter informed her stoically. Is that what you want? Honestly, Otter didn't have much interest in that. Such relationships between familiars were unreliable by nature. Gods were hardly bound by such agreements, and adventurers were rowdy. In the right circumstances, either could lead to conflict. Not to mention, the strength of their familiar meant any alliance was more a subordinate that they'd have to protect and take responsibility for, since they'd be an easier target for any enemies. Otter was not the type for such, much less the wider familiar. Protection and mentorship was not their forte. The Freya familiar only extended such protection for a few entities under Lady Freya's personal command. If this goddess desired that, Otter still wouldn't see much reason and would just refuse. Allies sounds a bit dash, Hestia started too. Don't you dare, Hestia, the Divine Smith immediately exclaimed though, leaning forth with a frown. It will just end in trouble. I'm telling you. Otter's thoughts froze as he realized how much the mere mention had worked up the Divine Smith. Plus, he wouldn't actually offer that. You've barely met him, but Otter is someone who only thinks about. Hephaestus continued, only to trail off as she caught sight of his face. Otter realized he once again had moved his lips to form a small smile. Don't do it, the Divine Smith warned, eye flashing. Also a bit of panic though, as for once she realized she was the one backed into a corner. You are just going to irritate me, Otter, and I will get you back. It might be petty to use such things to get back at the Divine Smith for always getting the better of him, and Otter preferred not to be petty. Yet, even he had his moments. Goddess Hestia, he spoke aloud, turning to face the diminutive goddess and meeting her blue eyes. I cannot introduce you to any such adventurers, but I can assist in other ways. Don't. Hestia spoke without acknowledging the warning from her friend, humming as she said. And I said, allying with Freya is a bit. I can provide some financial aid in terms of equipping any new adventurers you recruit and furnishing your new home. Deal. Damn it. Hephaestus cursed as Hestia gave in immediately, leaping and latching onto Otter's arm without hesitation. I'm out of here, Alan declared too, stomping out with a venomous look towards Otter. I want no part of this. Don't expect anyone else to help in this. I'll kill you, meathead, if you even think about lowering the tribute to Lady Freya. As if Otter would ever do that. For a new familiar, even 1,000,000 Valis was overblown. That could buy a house outright, compared to merely fixing up whatever property was provided. That was also barely a fraction of what even a single weapon for him would cost. He could pay for anything of new familiar with negligible portions of his funds. Ha ha, and you guys were talking about not being able to support myself, Hestia crowed, still hanging onto Otter's arm even as he sent her a blank look while raising his arm to lift her up too. Is this what Zeus called a sugar daddy? A guy who pays for things so long as I get a bit friendly. Hera said they were bad things, but this is great. Hestia, truly, shut up, Hephaestus said, now just holding her head in pain even as Otter slowly started to move his arm back and forth to try and shake off the goddess still hanging on. Although the Divine Smith then sent him a look, warning, you'll regret this. Despite that, he saw the slight acknowledgement that he won this time. Chuche. Perhaps so, Lady Hephaestus, Otter conceded, bowing his head as he gave up and ignored the limpet on his arm. But I see no reason to hold back for the sake of someone who has already left me unsatisfied so many times. Otter did not know why Horn recoiled and sent him a baffled look, or why Lady Hephaestus gained a look of amused exasperation. Although, both quickly fell by the wayside as a chiming laugh rang out. Ha 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 ha. Freya's laugh drew all of their attention immediately, wiping away all thought, with only Hestia taking a moment to look too. How delightful, she let out, voice still chuckling even as she spoke. Truly, I would hardly have expected anything done or spoken here to happen this morning. A lovely day, all told. Some wine with company, news for Mia, a few laughs and jokes to torment Otter within the future, and Otter's unexpectedly offered to support another familiar. I wonder if we did this day over several more times if it would have turned out so even once more. Don't make me consider how this might have gone with a few differences, Hephaestus murmured with resigned indignation. Well, this seems to have gone magnificently for me, Hestia proclaimed, finally dropping from Otter's arm and puffing out her chest with fists on her hips. This is my day. You still have to move out. I'll also ensure you are picked up in a bit for your first day on the job. Why? Hestia protested, taking the simultaneous responses like a blow to the stomach. She pointed at Otter as she continued. I got support already. Sugar daddy. It got her no leeway. He's only paying attention to you to annoy me, Hephaestus stated bluntly. I'm the only one allowed to torment Otter and have him support me, Freya added on too. Otter still didn't understand the odd look Horn once again sent him. Finally, after the other goddesses left, Otter found himself before his goddess in the manner he expected upon returning from the dungeon. The 66th floor, Freya remarked with a smirk as she reclined before him. Very good. I did not expect such a grand jump after breaking through to the glacier territory, even with the level up. Yet I suppose it inevitable that you would go deep after the others reached the 59th floor first, always competing with each other. How cute. I did not delve to compete with them, Lady Freya, Otter stated simply. Very true. Even if he knew of and respected the desires of the other executives to surpass him, they were not his rivals. Even if he felt pity towards them over it, he did not think of them so. They were behind him, chasing his back. He was instead looking forward, offering them no more than a back they had to chase. Even Finn and his crew only remained as nominal rivals due to shared memories of long-gone days of being comrades in being beaten up by Zeus and Hera, and the fact that they were of a rival familiar with abilities beyond strength that he could not match. If he had any true rivals remaining, it was the Knight of Knights, or the memory of that person he had wanted to beat more than any other. He merely lowered his head as he continued. I simply fought to find my limits, Lady Freya, and push them further. And did you? She asked, smirking. No, Lady Freya, he acknowledged, staying firm against any irritation at that. I can press further. My weapons merely could not hold up. I see, she replied, tilting her head now as she settled, the look of a goddess that included war in her domain emerging. I assume you are working to correct that. I have already commissioned new equipment from the Goibnu familia, Altina, Vol-Lodi, and Solingen, he explained. I lost my newest and best equipment against Bela, and these were merely the remainder. I am hopeful that this set will last deeper, preferably for more expeditions too. Good. I actually have news on that too, she informed. I sent Hephaestus back with a note to return tomorrow. I also have made arrangements with both Hermes and Dien sect. They all shall be bringing their best for an appraisal. I have many drops and other materials, my lady, but I do not believe that to be necessary. I am not referring to what you just returned with, but that, she claimed, pointing behind her at the large glass orb on her mantle. The Eye of Bela. That was a gift, Lady Freya. Which means I can use it as I will, she countered, grinning slyly. That also means I need to know what it can be used for. Whether to help replace the supreme black sword you broke against Bela or as a beautiful necklace to decorate my neck at the next God's gathering, I can properly decide. Of course, Otter merely agreed. I shall use it to show what I returned with two from the secret flaws. Whether in the set already being forged or the one after, I hope it shall be enough to reach the limit. The 71st flaw. The dead flaw that halted even that woman's children, she remarked, face hardening. Even we do not know what did that. I am eager to learn. Yes, Lady Freya. She tilted her head now, asking more calmly, do you wish your status updated, Otter? No, Lady Freya, he answered, not surprising her. These flaws offer enough struggle to test myself against still. Otter rarely updated his status. Usually only 3 times or so every level, using every challenge to wear on him and test himself against before updates lessened those struggles. He had only had one update as a level 5 before leveling up, and then only because he had to. They wouldn't allow him to join against the behemoth without it, and he'd been relegated to a supporter when he refused to level up at that time till he met his own standards for satisfaction. She let out, merely looking at him with glowing purple eyes. Voice coming out in a droll. Then I suppose then there is no need to delay asking why you are so unsettled, Otter. I do not know dash. My arcanum must be lying to me because I would sooner trust that has failed than you, Otter, are about to lie to me. I merely had some unpleasant memories rise during this expedition, Lady Freya. Otter had not been lying when he told Ankusha that the skill she had passed to him briefly was unpleasant. It was a weight not only on the body, but also the mind and soul. A weariness that set in. A crack in one's will that allowed old memories to rise. Memories Otter had done a very good job at never thinking of for 15 years. Ah, yes. You are the type to rigidly control your mind, discarding the extraneous and unneeded alongside that which you don't understand, she remarked aloud, looking at him with all the composure and surety of a god. It is one of your greatest strengths, bringing you focus and dedication. Also a weakness that has impacted your eloquence and emotions, but that's cute in a child. I guess it shouldn't be a surprise it might impact you too when you lose said control. Well, she asked impatiently, are you going to tell me? I would prefer not, my lady. Otter saw little point in dredging up memories more when those memories were the very reason he was unsettled enough for her to notice. Her lips pursed, but eventually she sighed and instead said, of course. If that is what you wish. We have something else to do too, no. Lady Freya, he merely said as he lowered his head in acknowledgement. The 66th floor. It has been a long while since you had so much to tell me, she proclaimed again, smiling. She made a graceful move of her head. Sit, Otter, and regale me of your adventures. With that, Otter actually lowered himself to the floor. He moved to lean his back against her lounge chair. He then opened his mouth and started to speak. The polar seas are cold, but I erred against any extra clothes to further train myself. The monsters on average are far larger too, although not beyond anything seen before. Many resembled the bloodsaurus of the dense forest. Ravine. The real challenges early were underwater, however. Diving shall soon be a valued DA as news spreads. Although, the first real challenge might have been a dragon that accidentally got me by surprise. Otter spoke more than many would believe him capable of. Here, it made him relax as few things did. It was an old habit of theirs, since she had first picked him up. When she had made sure he'd sit down each day and try to verbalize to her what had happened that day, when she was teaching him to speak. What he'd done. His thoughts. Even as that became untenable and unnecessary, it spawned a ritual after becoming an adventurer. This one holding up against the test of 25 years. Every new floor in the dungeon he'd explored, he would sit before her and start telling her of what he found. Every single one. In recent years, there had been depressingly few occasions. He was happy to have the chance once again. The next day, Otter had a variety of tasks he needed to do. Stock up on potions and elixirs again. Make a few stops to meet Lady Freya's requests at a few places, like dropping off the herbs to the Orsrine familiar. Receive accounting on his new equipment. Check on his plants at Demeter's. Review the familiar's finances to assure that Lady Freya would receive her tribute and the other necessities of Folkvanger would be met. Check in on Varna Mardol to ensure she was keeping up her training to test the Goliath. The meeting with the item makers to appraise Baylor's eye. Rare was he this busy, even as captain since the familiar was so independent and he rarely involved himself unnecessarily. If he was diligent, however, he could finish with enough time to serve and act as Lady Freya's attendant for a time too. Yet, it seemed he had another one he didn't expect. Ah, it was so bad. That SYR girl picked me up. And what is she? She sent me aerially scary smile when I kept asking though. Mamma Mia was also so loud and scary, and she refused to let me sit. The other waitresses also called me a newbie and said that I needed to do all the bad jobs due to seniority, and they kept teasing me. A waitress too. People started showing up just to make me serve them. Lokinoboobs even came and just laughed and pointed. For an hour. Mia eventually hit her and threw her out, which was great, but still. Ah yes. He remembered now why he had originally had no desire to involve himself in others' affairs when he had no need to. That didn't stop Lady Hestia, now an ally he had personally affirmed, from whining and trying to drag him while saying, and I was so tired that when Hephaestus picked me up and led me to where she was providing me, I fell right asleep. When I woke up though, I was in this dusty church. Heffy wouldn't see me either, her familiar saying she was too busy, so I can't even protest to her personally. Look, Look at it, Otter. It's just sad, isn't it? Otter felt a rather different sentiment when he saw the rundown church. He remembered this place. A fight that had drawn his attention. The white-haired witch quarreling with others as she had since first leveling up. It hadn't been her he had seen on investigating, however. It had been a different white-haired girl. Far frailer. Trembling just standing. Meeting her blue eyes. Peeking out the church doors. Then the girl that would eventually be known as the incarnation of talent launching an instinctive surprise attack on anyone seeing said sight, and dealing the newly level 3 Otter in a single blow his third humiliating defeat that marked the beginning of his struggles against Zeus and Hera. Otter had seen that girl in later years. They had moved into the Hera familiar home when Althea reached level 6. When she had forcibly dragged him without a care even there, he had seen her. Not even Althea being able to raise too much a fuss before her captain and her whims. How irritating, to be brought to a place that once again prompted memories best buried. As the goddess Hestia continued to speak, Otter had to reassure himself that a new familiar really couldn't be that much a hassle. Right. Hestia merely drinking, lazing around, and crashing with friends. Finds a sugar daddy. Hestia winning. SYR is going to devour this cocky pie lowly. So, this chapter was something of a shift. Not every chapter can be dungeon crawler though. Some surface plot and interactions have to happen, even if I realized how easy it is to just have Otter stand and silently listen as others talk. Developments here were long planned though. I will also admit my timeline of Hestia is a bit off. Thought there was 1 month between Hephaestus kicking her out and recruiting Belle, but checked and it's actually 3. That's also 2 weeks before canon, but not the worst thing to fudge. Another rando mention from Mir. Leon's magic kind of messed with one of my plans. Eventually, I was going to have Otter gain this skill. I thought it really fit since Otter's probably had more weapons break on him than anyone but maybe Belle, who has Hestia knife, or magic sword users. Simple Stiker. Simple strength, provides a slight increase to user's basic abilities with every weapon broken in battle, and provides user the fist strike and fist fighter DAs if they are rendered entirely without weapons due to broken weapons. The DAs are boosted in rank the more weapons were broken. Man, I've not had luck this break. Got sick again. Guess it is better to get sick twice with different things during break as opposed during semester, but rather has made this break lackluster to me. Well, hopefully I can get one more update out in coming week. Either way, here is a Tsubaki chapter. Also, craftsman POVs are hard. Especially since Danmachi doesn't go into specifics of crafting too often. Really makes me want to expand on it. Tried to avoid it too much though, and cut a few scenes since this is largely set up for later Tsubaki stuff and don't want it to expand too much, like Ganesha Familiar one. Thank you all for the kind words and skill suggestions. Don't think there were many proper questions that needed answering this time. The steel heated up. She could all but feel the heat in herself. The hammer fell. She felt the impact reverberating through her own body. The clang rang out. She heard its cry like her own. The red-hot metal shifted. She felt the stretch of its form like an extra limb. The forge sang. She was as much part of it as anything. The fire, the steel, the hammer, her flesh, her eyes, her ears, her heart. They were all notes of that song. A discordant note rang out from outside, and it caused a note from inside to resound too. The iron shattered. Damn it! Tsubaki snarled as she grabbed the shattered fragment of the sword, uncaring that it was red-hot. It was flying through the air in but an instant, so fast the air shrieked as it was cut. I'm getting tired of my ears being stabbed. The bad bat on the other end of this impromptu projectile was less cut as disintegrated by the impact that also blew away the mist of this floor. The several level 1 adventurers of her familiar that had been fighting it were on their butts. Not from the efforts of the monster, but from the booming impact that rippled out. They sent her wavering looks, mouths in ugly smiles from unintentional terror. I hate bad bats, she raged without care. The senses of adventurers heightened as they leveled up, somewhat correlated to dexterity. Now, it did come in with a number of innate limitations for practicality. Mental restrictions so they didn't hear literally everything inside 100 meters in the city, instead requiring some purposeful intent and focus. Durability rising too so loud noises don't burst their eardrums. So, the sound waves of bad bats didn't actually stun them like they could level 1 adventurers. Unfortunately, no innate sensory exclusion functioned against purposeful sound attacks like that, and even utter resistance to physical damage didn't change the fact that it was the equivalent of someone screaming in her ear. Having endured that far too long, she stood and roared. That's it. We're going to the 16th floor to get away from these damned bats. Unfortunately, there were enough level 1s to yell out heatedly, "We'll die." Have some courage. Generally speaking, camping on the upper floors was unnecessary. It was still well within the range of floors even a slow-moving group could descend to and ascend from inside a workday. All that would be saved would be a few hours of travel, and the cost would be the danger of camping in the dungeon. Not a good trade for most of the baby adventurers on these floors. The same even for the early middle floors. That's not to say there weren't advantages, if you were able. And Tsubaki fully intended to use that. "Oh, stop complaining," Tsubaki ordered, rolling her eye as they passed the first line that marked the entrance to the 13th floor. "It's just one more floor. You don't think you can handle it? That one floor is the difference between upper floors and middle floors. Entering the cave labyrinth." While that was a point that one would think made sense, Tsubaki merely shrugged and declared nonchalantly, "You lasted king enough on the 12th, means you should move deeper." "That only makes it harder," a male human claimed, gesturing at his gear. "Our equipment needs repairing, and we're running low on potions." Eighth male half-dwarf, that unlike Tsubaki actually showed that heritage in not breaking 5 feet, then added as she gestured at her dirty state, "Plus, we haven't returned to the surface. Shouldn't we update our statuses, or tilde wash up tilde?" "Hey, you can return," Tsubaki replied to that, shrugging. "Just don't think I'm going to give you more time. I'm only heading deeper." Tsubaki was long used to smelling like a forge, even if she'd punch someone who dared point it out, and her time was valuable. Literally. In a week, much less 2, she could forge a weapon worth tens of millions of valis. Many, in fact. Her limitation was less her actual smithing speed, but the limited clientele that could both pay for and be worth her work. That was what it meant to be the best mortal smith. She winked at them and informed them cheerily, "This is your chance. It's up to you on how to use it." Her declaration got no response. The level 1s only exchanged looks, submitting to the reality. Level 1s did not get level 5s guarding them on these floors. Not unless you were immensely favored. They were never going to have the safety that her presence offered again. 4 baby adventurers eyeing that first true wall that was a level up, there were plenty that would beg for a chance at 2 weeks with that sort of safety cushion. That was without even getting into the fact that she was their captain and her view on them was something they were unlikely to ever get out from. "Good," Tsubaki said, satisfied with this situation. "Now, we'll find a proper spot. I'll give your equipment a touch-up as you all set up camp." It all went smoothly. As one group, most monsters were waiting for a better opportunity, and they could handle the few dumb ones that didn't. Tsubaki knew a good place, and they were soon arriving. After her barked orders for the camp on the previous floor, they now were able to handle it. "Now, give me anything that needs a quick repair," Tsubaki ordered as she set up her portable forge. That got some eagerness. Not unexpectedly, adventurer smiths were particular about their equipment. While Hephaestus was strict about not using equipment too above your level, except when they really needed power like with magic swords, that didn't stop specialization and customization. They were the type to note and worry over every piece of wear and tear. That same professionalism usually meant they wouldn't allow anyone else to touch their personal equipment. But, well, this was her. She was soon being brought swords, shields, breastplates, hammers, and more. Although only half the reason was for repair, the other half being a chance for them to simply observe her working. Hephaestus' familiar was a smithing familiar that emphasized solo work, and they had personal workshops to facilitate that. Besides general classes for newbies and occasional lessons from their goddess as a reward for something, every smith coveted their own hard-earned trade secrets. Not that anything of this level was something Tsubaki would guard. So fast. She's not polishing, but she didn't even need to. Not to mention this was a lesson of a different sort. She usually took it upon herself to teach this lesson to newer level 2s, as most all of them got cocky once they earned the blacksmith DA and the quality of their work increased drastically. But this was a good time. She was going to be busy for the near future, and hopefully these members would be level 2 soon anyways. Thus, she gave them a glimpse of the chasm that awaited them beyond leveling up and earning blacksmith. "Here you go," as she tossed back a sword that had been sharpened in a minute flat. The human that had protested earlier tested it, stuttering out, "It's even sharper than before." She reforged one half of a dual blade set, making the dark elf owner bitterly remark as he received it, "The quality can't even be compared." As the time approached a single hour, more and more of the level 1 smiths were forced to a realization. saw gear that they had lovingly created and refined over days and weeks of dedicated effort be eclipsed by Tsubaki's quick and dirty repairs that never stretched beyond several minutes. They wandered away, feeling the mixed emotions of seeing something so amazing it made their own efforts feel irrelevant. Welf was at near the end, and handed over his broadsword as he remarked with a certain tone in his voice, "I managed to include War Shadow and Needle Rabbit drops in this, with Lady Hephaestus approving it for the middle flaws." That tone was pride. It was warranted too, with even the others, a few liking Welf, sending reluctantly acknowledging looks towards him. Hephaestus taught how to meld the lowest monster drops, goblin and kobold, into weapons, but above that was left for them to handle. The blacksmithing DA was a big part of utilizing better and better drops, but no small bit was improving or discovering techniques. Despite the former being unavailable for them yet, the latter usually took experimentation enough that it was upper-class adventurers that did so. Level 1s were usually still mastering the basics. It was probably the best weapon she'd yet been provided, a clear show of talent and honed blacksmithing skill. "Do you need some of our collected drops to dash?" "No." Tsubaki cut off. Yeah, even without his infuriating refusal to use his skill, Tsubaki concluded that Welf was going to need this lesson sooner or later. "A bit of the innate magic of the drops has leaked with the crack, but I can compensate by increasing efficiency in the border between hard steel outside and soft steel core," she said, already working. Welf burnt a bit too much slag off of the War Shadow claws in the outside edge. Alloy mix with too much steel hindered the flow of its innate magic to weaken the cutting aspect. Better with the killer rabbit horns in the core, preventing the sword from breaking entirely, but he failed to use those to strengthen the edge too. Too much separation. He didn't even try for that though, so she wouldn't show him an extra trick. A quick reworking allowed her to focus the War Shadow drop mixed into the very edge, allowing a seemingly less sharp edge for durability while using the hyper-sharpness characteristic of the drop to compensate. "There," she said as she tossed it back to the baffled Welf. "Should be better than ever." As she continued working, the half-dwarf girl, Conna, asked, "That's metalworking, right? How you are going so fast?" "Metalworking is good in that way," she answered absently, fixing a crack in a breastplate in but a minute of heating and a few hammer strikes. "Doesn't help in a few areas, without a lot of skill, but repair is a different question. That's what many of the high smiths have, right?" "Yep," Tsubaki said even as she finished up another piece. Besides being all but essential to repair enchanted equipment without having to reforge entirely and add more drops, it lowers repair time drastically. Most of the high smiths who choose to stop there and stop adventuring typically have blacksmith and metalworking. That ideal comfort spot for a smith. High smith was a title granted to smiths at level 3, very rare outside Orario and impressive even in Orario where most smithing familiars only required level 2. Even Hephaestus familiar, which all but required members keep going to level 3, had most stop there. Usually only those who enjoyed adventuring or were completely confident in leveling up further got a non-crafting DA at level 3. "I only got it at level 5 though," Tsubaki continued. "Wasn't much interested in repairs, and wanted to push bounds of what I could create." "You have spearman and magic resistance, right?" the Conna asked, giving Tsubaki a look like she was looking at something inexplicable. Tsubaki just shrugged it off, used to craftsmen having that reaction since they rarely leveled up and so had to be very careful, stating simply, "I was confident in leveling up further." Dark Elf Louvre now spoke up, eyeing the katana at her side. "Yet don't you usually use a sword?" "I generally prefer a katana, especially against people, but I usually use axes or a spear against stronger monsters," she answered again, uncaring. "My mother taught me many Eastern martial arts from her home, so I use what is needed. Dad was also a dwarf too, so magic resistance is easily available." Admittedly, she couldn't say they were the absolute best choices, but her mother wielded a spear primarily, and she died from old wounds from the dungeon when Tsubaki was a level 2. Her father was dragged off with the Zeus and Hera familiars against the one-eyed black dragon, right before she reached level 4. Choosing to enhance her spearwork and gaining a dwarven trait had appealed to her both times. What was the point in leveling up if it didn't give one the leeway to prioritize such sentiments? She quickly changed the topic, announcing, "Metalworking isn't my favorite, but useful here. Don't need any DAs for this level of work, but even simplest use of DA allowed me to cut down time to a 10th or so. Prefer not to waste time." Her words were chosen carefully, and succeeded in making those listening recall. Tsubaki had been very purposeful. Even without a Falna, the only change to her work would be the amount of time needed. Repairs done. She made a shooing motion as she said, "There, it's all done. Start exploring. Groups of 3 at the least, but stay close for now. I'll keep watch for several hours for you to get used to these floors." "Understood, Captain." "Good, now make the most of this," Tsubaki continued, standing with ends of hips and grinning widely at Term. "Use this time. Group hunting infant dragons on the 12th floor can require months before leveling. You can cut that down to weeks in the cave labyrinth. Silverbacks and hard-armored are more plentiful here, so focus on them. Call for me with hellhounds unless you have salamander wool incorporated in your armor, but I don't want any of you running from Almirage or dungeon worms. I will also spank anyone who spots a crystal mantis and loses it. Person who kills it gets its drop." "Yes, Captain Tsubaki. And, for the love of everything good and dear, block off the passages here. If a single bat gets to this camp and screams, I will break all your equipment before your eyes and make you use standard stuff." "Why yes, Captain Tsubaki. Screw bad bats." She brought them to the cave labyrinth solely as its more tunnel-like nature made it far more possible to create a perimeter against flying monsters than the wide-open and misty 12th floor. That they would gain more excelia here was a factor. 12th floor was only good for leveling up when it came to infant dragons, but it was mainly the bad bats. Tsubaki kept working at her portable forge. This was after all her own work here. She had personally hauled a good number of iron ingots down for her to work with. With these, she put everything she had into it. The lessons learned from Hephaestus, from her father, from the dwarf kingdom of Vol Lodi, from Solingen, her blacksmith developmental ability, metalworking, her own experimentation, everything that she had accrued as a smith in 38 years of life and 26 years with a falna. She worked with everything she had in her arsenal. The iron cracked. Inserted my mind too fast. The iron cracked. Even slower. The iron cracked. Maybe a surge instead. The iron shattered into bits. Insert mind in very small streams, leaving majority uninfused. The currents cause iron to weaken inside, creating structural flaws. Using metalworking to mix the metal in the core. Only spread out the degradation, and an irritated hammer blow shattered it into iron sand. Return back to experimenting with infusing mind into it. Structural degradation too much. Monster horde. Tsubaki moved as soon as she heard that, easily discarding the useless iron she had been forging. 200 meters down, one tunnel was covered in a blur. She soon appeared behind a group of 3. Welf was included, alongside the dual-wielding dark elf Arebsith, and another human male wielding a large shield, Kenneth. They had found themselves facing a good half-dozen silverbacks with a whole host of Almirage. She merely stopped, tilting her head as she watched them conduct a fighting retreat. Unfortunately, Arebsith had good senses and looked over his shoulder at her while yelling, "Why aren't you dash? Don't look away," Tsubaki told him, moving and drawing her katana. It allowed her to cut a silverback in half that had used the opening to jump and swing from the ceiling to try and land on him, the monster turning into dust. She used the recoil to push herself back so she landed behind him. Not a shift in her tone, she explained bluntly, "I'll save you, but at least have the guts to fight. Both Silverbacks and Almira are just level 1 monsters, so the only danger was merely from numbers. Get used to this. Use positioning and cooperation to wear them down, or at least cut a path for retreat. It would be pointless to bring them all down here if she didn't ensure they were pushed beyond their limits." "Seriously?" Welf demanded, using his large broadsword to block a silverback but being knocked back. "Yep," she said, popping her lips at the end. "Go." "Fine." Arebsith spat where Welf was shocked silent and Kenneth only growled, launching himself at one of the silverbacks. "I'll cut them all." Kenneth growled again, and moved right after him to block an attempted attack at his back from 3 Almirage and then scattering them with an attempted mace strike. "Got your back," the man who usually communicated in growls and grunts deigned to say. Tsubaki sent a look at Welf, the obvious one out, and asked, "Welfie? This might be why they don't like you." "No, it's other things," Welf declared with a scowl even as he moved back into the fight. Tsubaki just shrugged and watched them. They might have been able to fight their way through, but not without serious injuries. The sort of impairment that would leave most adventurer groups picked off by the dungeon as they tried to ascend. As they had potions in the camp though, Tsubaki saw no need to get involved. Being faced with unexpected monster hordes or past parades and finding that primal instinct inside to fight and survive beyond what you otherwise could was one of the more common ways to rank up. "Purple moths," Arebsith yelled in warning. It made Tsubaki raise an eyebrow. Those were rare in the cave labyrinth. Far more common in the floors before this, and much less likely to attack like this. The sparse numbers of them instead built cocoons in dark and easily missed nooks of the roof or walls, which exploded and released poison powder with proximity. Guess the monster horde attacking was too tempting a target for the two purple moths to ignore. Despite the warning, though, none of the three reacted in time, or at all before the moths doused them in the poison dust. Even as the poison spread to her, Tsubaki just pointed and laughed. What the hell? Why didn't you handle them? Welf demanded of her, the three very quickly retreating before the new energy of the monsters as the poison weakened their limbs and made them nauseous. You guys never asked me to, and didn't even try to handle them yourselves. Amateur mistake, Tsubaki answered in amusement, although her katana was drawn and the two flying monsters were bisected. There. Now, continue. Unfortunately, the three were clearly flagging now, even the minor poison eating at them to turn the tides. The monsters pressed. Tsubaki ended up needing to cut down 4 monsters to spare them debilitating wounds. Although once the final one dropped to Erebsetha's blades, he fell to a knee while the 2 humans both bent over and retched. Tsubaki commented, sighing. Let's go back and get you 3 antidotes. Why you are the reason for this. Hey, you better get used to fights like that if you intend to ever become high smiths, she told them. Once they were downing antidotes, she also continued in a lecturing tone. You 3 could have handled that. Erebseth, your weapon skills surpass your courage. Fix that. Offensive power is useless if you aren't willing to attack. There's a reason I chose to become a smith, the dark elf grumbled. You are an adventurous smith. Go find some ordinary blacksmith shop if you don't want to fight. You have the talent, so don't forget it. Tsubaki told him before moving on. Kenneth, you don't attack enough either. You hold a flank and guard Erebsetha's back well, but your flank is all but static. You test Erebsetha's endurance if you merely wish to hold till he can come to your aid. Your mace isn't there to scare monsters, but to kill them. He merely grunted. Overall, a good and balanced duo, but likely to be worn down by a horde of monsters overcutting their way free and thus need work. As for Welfie, she continued, turning to him. Your teamwork is bad, fighting separately. You are using your weapon size with broad strokes to keep multiple enemies away, and you are actually doing well with what you have, but you do not have the strength nor agility to pull that off long term. Find a team. Preferably a fast attacker to help distract and draw off enemies from you. You think I wouldn't if I had the option. Welf grumbled under his breath, although she could hear it. Guess that was indeed a reality. Welf wasn't popular in the familiar, since he had all but been handed a silver spoon due to his heritage, yet while most had to spend years of training and uncertainty. Most of the level 1s had few to no clients. After all, while Welf was invaluable if he just used his gift. Their goddess saw potential in him, and even Tsubaki acknowledged he had genuine talent even beyond his Krozo blood, but that didn't remove the reason for many of his fellows to be resentful. Tsubaki liked him well enough on a personal level, but it still impacted her view on his seriousness as a smith intent on challenging the domain of the divine. For those who had much more reason to have that professional disagreement impact their personal view on him, it's not like Tsubaki was poor or struggling as newbie smiths. It wasn't a surprise he often had difficulty finding parties willing to take him on. Well, figure it out, she still told him bluntly. It still wasn't her job to relieve and protect him from the costs of his decisions. That shut him up, even if he was naturally disgruntled, although he did look at her and ask, Are you not going to take an antidote? Oh, I guess I did get some poison too, she said as she lifted a hand. It trembled slightly, although it didn't worry her. At level 5, such weak poison would be flushed from her system in minutes and only cause the slightest of symptoms. Still better to get rid of. I can handle it fine though. She started to chant. I am a forge. Fire is my breath, metal is my bones, and molten is my blood. Burn away, impurities, for I am a forge. Hearth kill. As the short chant spell finished, steam rose from Tsubaki's body and her skin reddened as her temperature rose. She only kept it up for a moment. However, she instead released her spell upon feeling the weak poison burnt away. I didn't know you had a spell, Welf quickly commented. Most smiths have a spell. The blacksmith DA allows us to manipulate our mind, so a spell usually follows if one has a slot. They just usually aren't too good, Tsubaki answered freely, shrugging. I got this one as a level 1, admittedly, but still unimpressive. All it does is flood my body with fire element to burn away impurities. Main purpose is curing myself of poisons or toxins, although also gives me resistance to both heat and cold when active too. That sounds useful, Welf remarked. Prevented me from needing to get the abnormal resistance DA, so yes, Tsubaki agreed. That was usually an issue for adventurer smiths. DAs were valuable necessary for craftsmen, but abnormal resistance was for most any adventurer. It was possible for level 2s to manage with antidotes, even level 3s, but level 4 all but required it unless they had a curative spell. Tsubaki winked and laughed though as she added, most usage I get out of it is for drinking though. Fixes a hangover right quick it does, haha. That is useful, Kenneth agreed, actually speaking and sending her an envious look. That made Tsubaki laugh more, even if she ordered, haha, I am blessed indeed. Now, you less blessed, take a regular potion and get back out there. I need to get back to my smithing. She was part of the forge again, a song being sung, the iron her instrument, and her hammer plucking it, the fire a chorus, and her breath the conductor. The iron cracked, infusing the mind with a different pattern. The iron cracked. Different pattern again. The iron cracked. More mind. The iron cracked. Even more. The iron sattered. Large surge all at once. The iron broke down completely into iron sand. Less mind. The iron cracked. Even less. The iron cracked. Even less. Really allow it to seep in slowly. Iron remained whole, but numerous structural weaknesses appeared. Tsubaki took a mind potion, pushing her mind reserved with these repeated failures. Repeat whole process with a different pattern. The iron failed again and again. Different pattern again. The iron failed. Wrong methodology. What other aspects could be used? Tsubaki considered that even as she panted from low mind. There you guys are, she declared as 15 level 2s of the Hephaestus familiar finally tracked arrived to the campsite. She then questioned, if my timing is right, weren't you supposed to arrive yesterday? We searched the 12th floor, where we were supposed to meet you. One of them responded, sending her a gimlet eye. Thoroughly. An entire day just to search the 12th floor. Wow, you really do need this dungeon time, she replied irreverently to that. It got her a few looks, but she merely waved it off with a laugh. She instead turned to the level 1s that had gathered and announced. So, the level 2s are here so we are reorganizing. We'll move to the 15th floor for our new camp. Level 1s, move to support the level 2s. Newer level 2s and any level 1 that intent to fight stay to the 14th floor. I won't be able there for immediate help, so no pure level 1s parties anymore. At least one level 2 with each, and everyone needs salamander wool for hellhounds. I'll stay on the 15th floor, so level 1s can act as supporters even with the minotaurs and hellhounds. Any veteran level 2s, group up solely amongst yourselves if you intend to fight on the 16th or 17th floors. Any level 1s wishing to act as supporters to them need my permission. You can even go deeper to the 19th floor if you wish, but remember I won't be able to help you immediately. Those groups on different floors have one person selected ready to run for me if you need help. You'll need to be prepared to hold on for a time till I arrive. I don't want any deaths. We shall adjust as we go for appropriate difficulty, so don't get impatient. Any questions? Ultimately, everything was worked out. That was the rough plan Tsubaki had worked out. Everyone in the familiar, if they chose to join the expedition for training, would have a week focused almost entirely on them. Then the next stronger group would arrive, they'd go deeper, and the previous group would turn to acting in a more support role. Next would be Large Tree Labyrinth and Water City for level 2 and 3s. Then Dense Forest Ravine for level 3s and 4s. Finally, the White Palace and Volcano Territory for veteran level 3s and 4s where Tsubaki would be able to press herself a bit more. 2 weeks wasn't long, but fighting for 12 to 16 hours each day unlike usual dives would very much allow a burst of hardcore training. Doing the math to create a timeline, Tsubaki once again realized she'd likely need to accompany another familiar down far deeper if she wanted a good chance to reach level 6 in any expedient time frame. Time passed and Tsubaki got back into the flow of events. She did very well when on schedules. She rotated who was active at each time, arranging it so the days were split into 3. One high-risk period where she actively patrolled the floors to save anyone. A medium-risk period where she merely guarded the camp but would move to help anyone. Then a low-risk period where a number of people were sleeping and groups could only operate on the floor of the camp. It all worked so she all but fell into a trance that made the time fall away. Patrolling. Sentry duty. The low-risk times even allowed her to focus on her smithing experiments. The iron shattered. Maybe his hold alter the quenching method. No, It usually shattered before that. Maybe heat the iron to a molten state and infuse the mind then. What are you doing, Captain? The question made Tsubaki look up, not having quite entered a trance. She saw the speaker was one of the level 2s, although a number of people currently resting had drifted over to watch too. It made her look at the iron she'd been heating up. Smithing, she answered in a questioning tone, displaying the piece. But it is iron. Well, I am turning it into steel. If I get to that point. Not the point. The more veteran member of the familiar deadpanned. Iron or steel, makes no difference. I haven't seen you at any drops or better materials for alloying either. Doing this with iron is the point, and so if not creating an alloy. Well, beyond the steel itself, Tsubaki countered, setting the iron down. She then pointed at them with a smirk, declaring, I'm figuring out how to enchant iron and steel. That drew stunned reactions. That's impossible, another finished bluntly. And disbelieving reactions. According to conventional wisdom, yes, Tsubaki conceded, shrugging and turning back to examining the iron she was working with. But a lot of conventional wisdom has loopholes, if you have enough skill and knowledge. There was a reason most smiths moved on from steel equipment. It was truly the most basic choice because it neither had innate magic nor could it hold any infused in it. They just cracked, and the magic was lost. Even other metals like copper, gold, or silver could at least hold magic. Magic was what improved equipment. The more magic a material innately possessed or could hold if infused, the more could be done with it. In many ways, all the magical materials natural in the surface world or in the dungeon were just regular materials that had been infused with magic that settled into a specific form with magical benefits. Crafting involved utilizing said innate magic of materials, or using DAs like blacksmith to infuse magic, for something extra. Enchantments being a proper manipulation of said magic into a more noticeable effect, as opposed to sticking to the natural effect of the innate magic such as extra sharpness or durability. Such as magic swords, which were just weapons where the magic was used for an enchantment to release some sort of magic attack till the magic supply ran out and the whole thing broke. The last part was since without said magic, the materials degraded rapidly. Even orichalcum, the most enduring and resistant material the surface world offered, was not immune to this. It was so because its innate magic resisted degradation or damage, but that magic was limited. True, orichalcum in sturdier forms like vaults could last millennia if they weren't attacked frequently. In comparison, a thin sword that had said magic manipulated into a Durandal attribute for heightened durability and used frequently would need maintenance every few months, and inevitably need replacing after maybe a decade. It was why ancient weapons being passed down were restricted to stories, even weapons sitting on a shelf degrading in less than a century from the magic leaking. So, iron and steel needed to be alloyed with monster drops which had and could hold magic. Then one would obviously hope to replace it with better metals. It was simply the way. As the smith improved, they went to better materials. Iron and steel was left behind. This fundamental piece of adventuresmith knowledge made one of the watchers repeat insistently, "But you can't enchant iron. It doesn't hold the magic." "Are you sure?" she asked, looking closer at the iron intently, as if trying to discern a secret. She then sent them a look. "Haven't you heard about the secrets of steel?" Several perked up, although many were still clueless. Chuckling, she examined the iron again as she mused. There are a lot of stories of ancient smiths, that they figured out ways to smith orichalcum and mithril even without fauna. Some tales speak of ancient tribes that learned to work steel in special ways. Enchant it. True steel. Myths, one person stated skeptically. Or just secrets that weren't successfully passed down even as the methods for orichalcum and mithril were, Tsubaki retorted. The lost secrets of steel. Or, maybe not so lost. That got her some looks. Tsubaki chuckled but still explained, tone that of entertaining a group of children even if plenty listening were level 2 adventurers. My father had a suspicion. One of the Hierophamilia's 2 level 7s was a weapon master and a smith. When she was younger, he said she only used steel weapons she personally made till level 4. Supposedly come from a secret village of Kunoichi, and wouldn't ever answer him on what she did as it was. Supposedly a village secret. He always thought they must have known the secrets. He raised me while telling me that true steel existed. Some of the skeptics clearly still didn't believe her, although the one to speak instead said, "Till level 4. Obviously shows a limit. Why would you try to discover something like that, when you can make something better using known methods? Are you not a craftsman, boy?" she demanded, despite him being in his 20s. The reaction to the name made him grimace, making her chuckle. Sometimes, all a true craftsman needs is to satisfy a curiosity. Meet a challenge. She had, as a youngling, declared she would learn to create true steel. She had tried for a time. Then she leveled up, and it fell by the wayside. New materials were always available. More readily known things to learn. Like many things, childhood ambitions were left behind. Nothing said one couldn't pick them back up though. What is the point in being a master smith if you can't take some time off to pursue a whim? She added on playfully. It was either this or hauling adamantite, mithril, orichalcum, and more down to smith. That would just be repeating what she had been doing for the past few years too. At least this was new. If she wanted to press forward both to fulfill that demand of Otter for her to level up, and to make a weapon that he begged her to sell to him as retribution for his audacity, she needed to find and accomplish new things. Plus, if there was a period to spend time and effort on a whim, it was when she was stuck down here for weeks saving baby adventurers from minotaurs and hellhounds anyways. Now, shoo, she said as she now made motions for them to leave. I've given you story time. Get back to your stuff, and leave me to mine. Shoo shoo. As they scattered, she just shook her head in amusement, although that dropped away as she turned back to the steel. Whim or not, Tsubaki's pride as a smith still meant she was going at this with full force. The iron cracked. Captain. Tsubaki looked up at that call, and saw new arrivals. Oh, did another week already pass? She asked as she stood, knocking her head and sticking out her tongue. Lost track of time again. Well, it is time for us, one of the level 3s answered. Good. That means we can head down to the 22nd floor or so, she announced, although she then turned to the level 1s. Time for you all to go back. Let's find a level 2 to escort them Actually, Captain, she was interrupted, the same person coming forward with a letter. Lady Hephaestus asked us to send you this. Raising an eyebrow, she took it. She was being called back. Apparently Lady Freya had called upon Hephaestus to help appraise an item once Otter returned to the surface. Apparently he had done so. Clearly something had happened there, but Tsubaki was more concerned with the item being appraised. The Eye of Bela. Tsubaki felt a shiver run through her. Honestly, she wasn't so sure she was in the mood to see Otter again. She was still a bit mad, and hadn't yet made something she could rub in his face. Yet, she had complained before about him not coming to her with the sword of Eudeus. This was, Gah, I would kiss a hobo for a chance to examine that, she burst out, making several people jump and many more of her familiar members send her weird looks at the random statement. The last time she had something of this level actually above it was 6 years ago with the Leviathan Fang. Although one stupid dude instead joked, might want to take a bath first. The hobo probably smells better than you right now. She flicked his head and sent him sprawling on his butt. Don't comment on a woman's smell. The other women present nodded, all them having had to deal with smelling like a forge at times. The orichalcum gates of Gnosis opened, purposefully menacing by only showing a dark passage in a way clearly meant to intimidate. She did not care, and walked right in. The passage led to a larger room. As she moved to the center, 2 others emerged from other passages. Relying on her own mask, she was able to observe them without worry. One figure made her narrow her eyes, despite the mask making it pointless to glare. Yet, the hatred she felt hadn't settled even after all these years and what she had become. The sight of that short pink hair, yellow eyes, and too wide smirk brought her back to years ago, when she was still a person who had a right to despise such evil with no reservation or shame. Arachnia. Valette agreed. The urge to attack that filthy member of Evolus was held back by knowledge that they'd be sacrificed all the same by her master. Well, that and the other figure. Arachnia was level 5, but this figure was worse. The third figure was covered by a simple cloak, hood raised to shadow the top half of her face. Only red hair, green eyes, and an emotionless mouth was revealed. Just the sight made the whispers in her own head intensify, that disgusting being once again trying to speak to her. She refused utterly, buoyed by hatred and Lord Dionysus' will. She glared at the corrupted remains of Revis. Valletta spoke, cutting off her own thoughts. Ein. Neither of the creatures responded to the false names bestowed upon them, which only seemed to prompt Valletta to let out another of her disgusting smiles as she looked at Revis, exclaiming in a tone both angry and mocking, "We heard Otter returned from the glacier territory. 66th floor, I hear." Even his familiar executives supposedly reached the 59th. Oh, wow. That's so great, right? If only we had some plans in place to slaughter anyone that reached floors down low. What were those floors again? Oh yeah, the 59th and 60th, wasn't it? Even as Valletta growled out that last bit, Revis didn't shift nor did her all but lifeless eyes change. And now I heard the Ganesha and Loki familiars are down deep already too, Valletta continued, sauntering close to Revis to ominously circle her. Now, unless you bring news that some first-class adventurers were slaughtered, I hope you have a good explanation why nothing happened. Revis was clearly unintimidated, her eyes suddenly flashing, and even Valletta knew enough to make room as Revis stated. The situation was untenable, even for her. She hid the newborn demispirit in the cracks of the 59th floor, and she then went deeper. Running scared, eh? Valletta mocked. Aine herself finally spoke up, as much as she didn't want to, declaring, no, it was the right choice. Enio ordered it. Even if she would not lose outright to the otter, the likelihood of killing him is low. He would have escaped with knowledge of her. That bore. Valletta cursed. It was unfortunately the case. Otter was a unique threat to their plans, even before he leveled up. There was a reason that Lord Dionyse had approved Evelus working with the Ishtar familiar to hopefully ambush him. Even accepting the use of one of the extra jewel fetuses they were planning to harvest for redundancy. He was just that dangerous. They hadn't expected Ishtar to win, of course, even with a demispirit. However, he had secretly planned to have Aine herself and Revis spying on any such attempt, intending to finish off Otter if possible. Any Ishtar members too, since the Ishtar familiar was still one of the 6 forces he had deemed a potential threat to Orario's destruction. If anything, Ishtar's willingness to even try such a plan indicated she had to have some trump card that they hadn't learned of, only reinforcing the necessity of removing them too. With the current changes, though, Enio now considers Otter clashing with her or learning of our plan enough to investigate as an automatic loss, Aine explained. Complete avoidance is necessary. Oh ho, Valletta left out, smirking. The city destroyer is scared of one shitty pet of a perverted goddess. No, he is not, Aine said, facing the Evelus member and almost hoping she offers more provocation so Aine could act. Enio has more than enough plans to handle anything. Not even this is outside his considerations. Freya familiar, Loki familiar, Ganesha familiar, Hephaestus familiar, Ishtar familiar. Whatever secret forces Lord Dionyse is sure Uranos has hidden away. The 6 forces her lord has deemed threats that must be outmaneuvered if his dream was to occur. 15 years, he had gathered information on them. 6 years, he had created plans and contingencies. His plan was not something so undeveloped that he didn't have dozens of permutations or adjustments ready. No matter what any of them did, any possible action had already been prepared for. You say that and that complete avoidance is necessary, and yet it already came so close to failing. Revis now spoke though, approaching Aine till she could glare at her from up close. She barely had time to hide the immature demispirit before the Freya executives showed, and she was only able to reach the 67th floor ahead of Otter. If he hadn't stopped at the 66th floor, it all would have ended. Your Enio was meant to distract any force able to reach that deep. Direct them to the surface. Do not make any mistake. You or her, Aine warned as she stepped forward, pushing her mask against Revis' forehead. We provided you the information on the Freya executives likely to go that deep after her leveled up. We also warned you of when Otter was to descend, and I assure you that you will not be able to find that elsewhere. Revis glared. Aine did not care, stating coldly, Otter works with none. Besides the goddess Freya, only one source receives any warning from him on when he shall descend. One person he always informs, and Enio's hand is grasping the throat of that one source. We gave you hours of warning, and you won't get better from anyone. The glare remained, but I knew that Revis had no counter to that. Scoffing inwardly, she then demanded, what about her own methods? Was she not supposed to be able to block off the 59th floor? Such magic is complicated. It is not physical. It merely warns away subconsciously. More illusion than barrier, Revis claimed, finally stepping back. It was never meant to hold if a group of high-level adventurers were determined to reach the 59th floor. She always intended to merely slaughter and use any that pushed further. Unfortunately, Otter is likely the adventurer in all Orario best able to resist corruption or parasitizing, Aine supplied, thankful for the mask as she forced down ugly bitterness and resentment. If only. He, and now you've got your oh-so-great spirits locked down. How ironic, Valletta mocked, unable to help herself. One forced to the 67th floor, and the other so useless it has to hide. She wouldn't lose. This is merely to continue the plan you rely on, Revis stated, not reacting further. Merely explaining in a hard voice. The other is not grown enough to handle a group of first-class adventures. She had to move and hide it. Otto almost found it, and only the cracks of the dungeon helped hide it from him. If it isn't able to feed without fear of adventurers, it won't ever grow enough. Thus she is forced to flee unless they want to abandon the plan entirely, and the jewel fetus they sacrificed to serve as a guard or lure on the 59th floor became a vulnerability. We shall keep you appraised as much as possible. It should be simply enough to find when the only 3 familiars able to reach that far are on the surface, so long as little evidence is left of their existence for when they are there, Ein said. One can eat, and she can wait till a proper time to ambush Otto or one of the familiars that deep. Loki familiar was predictable on their expeditions, all organized well ahead of time. This expedition by the Ganesha familiar all but came out of nowhere, but still not enough worry. Either would be easy enough to work around, luring in or avoiding as needed for the plan. The Freya familiar, though, that familiar's unpredictability and solo efforts were more troublesome. Yet, they hadn't expected issues before this. That familiar's weakness was the same as its strength. Their goddess. They followed Freya so much that one only had to get an estimate of the goddess to know how the familiar would act. Freya admittedly was terrifying if she was ever worked up, but Lord Dionysus had barely even needed effort to figure out how checked out the goddess was in recent years. Goddess Freya had all but lost ambition since the Great Feud, and that filtered down into stagnancy for her familiar. She acted on a loose sense of duty and whim nowadays, and seemed entirely distracted otherwise. Yet, somehow, who would have guessed the little independent will that familiar had Otter's desire for greater strength and the desire of others to not fall behind him, would prompt new energy entirely separate from their goddess's explicit will. Ein still asserted sternly, we can work out how to avoid them, for both the deep floors and the pantries for the jewel fetuses. Because that still needed to happen as well. They needed to take over and use a pantry for several days to properly manifest one of the jewel fetuses, and that required certain considerations. Even with creatures acting as guards, they could be overwhelmed. Too deep a floor, and the monsters would break through any barriers and they couldn't hold for days against a never-ending horde. Too high of a floor, and the risk of adventurers stumbling across them increased. They also couldn't reuse any, as the risk of the dungeon acting from repeated destruction was too high. They were currently on the 35th floor, and could only really go to easier floors. They needed at least 7 jewel fetuses for the final part of the plan, and preferably twice that for plenty of spares for distractions or ambushes. With them only having 3 so far, the final ones would be far too exposed to adventurers than hoped. Last thing they needed was Freya familiar learning of it just because some of those reckless idiots dived deep without any warning. That does not matter, Revis claimed though, glaring. Not when the risk of Otter stumbling on her is so high. Ein was irritated, but still asked, what is needed? Time, Revis answered bluntly. She needs to find a hiding spot suitable for her that is out of the way he would likely pass, and more to set up magic to ward him away. He is likely to dive again as soon as his equipment orders come in, Ein remarked. She then reluctantly turned to Valletta. Not enough time. What options are there to delay him? Valletta smirked, remarking, good thing about a dumb shit like that boar is that he's easily distracted. He's not like Finn. If you give that guy a piece of the puzzle, he'll start picturing the whole puzzle and start investigating everything. That boar is a hunter at best. If he finds something, he'll hunt it down but move on afterwards. You want to get him looking elsewhere. Somewhere of our choosing. Obviously, Valletta claimed, chuckling. The 2 assets we can't allow him to learn of is her and Knossos. He wouldn't stop till he brought them down. Likely true. I wasn't sure how strong she actually was, but Otter treating her as some form of monster Rex to hunt was an automatic loss. Even if he didn't bring the Freya executives to assist, it would distract her from the plan. Ennio needed her controlling the demispirits, not to mention the assistance of the other creatures still under her control. Knossos was also too much at risk. The man-made dungeon would have allowed even the remnants of Everless to challenge any familiar that challenged them there, but not anymore. While the orichalcum gates likely hold, the walls were just adamantite. They'd already calculated that Otter, Gareth Landrock, and maybe Hogni Ragnar could be able to break through at least some of them. With Otter's level up, he was the most physically powerful adventurer Orario had seen in centuries. What point was a dungeon when the rat trapped inside could just break through walls to go in a straight line? If Otter learned of Knossos, even if he failed in the first or second assault, He could no doubt escape and just keep coming back till he won by attrition. So, we make him look elsewhere, Valletta continued, waving her finger. Said finger eventually settling on Revis. And I know just the little girl to do it. Revis glared. Valletta didn't care, continuing. I said it before, didn't I? We already know that Gale is in some sad disguise at that little restaurant far too close to the Freya familiar to be nothing. 2 birds, 1 stone. If a threat is obvious, that boar will be distracted. At least long enough for that her to finish her work in the deep flaws. So long as the attacker doesn't lead to Gnosis in any way, they can create issues whenever he's on the surface. Once we can allow him to descend again, then we've also got weeks at a time where he's out of play. Just perfect, right? Valletta grin was just sick as she declared. So, Revis, next time we hear that the boar is about to descend, how about you burn that hostess of fertility down and break all the cuties inside to send a message to that familiar of pets? Can you do that for me? Break that Gale. For me. I once again could only call Valletta sick. Revis merely stared, eyes blank again to show her thrall to her, and finally spoke. Understood. Ended up with a few more social scenes this chapter, but whatever. Hope it helps. Even if they once again reminded me how hard it is to have a quiet MC. Just about every MC I've written is much easier to write as talking freely. Its own challenge, though. Also, warning, appraisal scene got a bit long because, well, hard to hold back on elaborating on drop items and crafting system when you start talking about them. Johnny Bobber the 1ST, thanks for all the reviews. Torres Juan 010, filling in crafting system is a bit hard, but glad if I can keep it somewhat entertaining. In my view, staffs are more to stabilize, enhance, and store extra magic. Extra mass to store magic in, sort of, and built of materials that facilitate that. You can cast without them, but they help with big spells and more control-demanding tasks. I won't confirm villains. Dungeon does have more than 71 flaws, since I feel it would be a letdown to not. Insane Machias in 3A, I thought it better to differentiate what common blacksmiths like Tsubaki do and the ultra-rare mystery users. Explained a bit more on this AU's mystery DA this chapter. It doesn't often overlap with blacksmithing, since the latter is more technical. 1B, after the 24th Pantry Battle, Revis was always portrayed as a serious threat that any of the level 6 could face without serious caution. While some is just power escalation, especially by end, but does imply a well-fed Revis is at least high level 6. Although doesn't mean success though. Can you imagine if Syr of Freya and Hestia were killed like this? 2B, we don't have numbers of Zeus Hera familiars besides level 9 Empress, level 8 Maxim, Zold, and Althea. I just settled on Zeus having had 1 level 8, 3 level 7s, and 11 level 6 as main fighting force. Hera as 1 level 9, 2 level 7s, and 10 level 6. Not necessarily right, but my thought was to have them be roughly equal to start of canon Orario if everyone received ranked up once. At least high-level people. So that round of rank-ups put them, at least in levels, equal to Zeus Hera before they started the great quests, with Heraheim then giving their top tier the edge. Could be wrong, but I had to come up with something till we actually receive canon numbers. Otter's eyes opened as long-honed instinct flared to tell him it was time to awaken. He rose slowly, but deliberately. The scarce sleep he'd managed more than enough. Careful, automatic movements removed the blanket, got him out of bed, and fixed the bed without damaging anything. He then continued the morning routine. A cup of water. Dressed himself appropriately. Then, he started his workout. He grabbed one of the magic items and strapped it to his wrist. He then did 2 more on the same limb, and the same to the other arm. Then 5 for each leg. A belt strapped with them went around his waist. Stretches followed alongside a series of unarmed strikes with each limb. Then a series of acrobatics. All to adapt to the weights he'd applied to himself. When he was ready, he grabbed a specially designed backpack designed to hold dozens of the weight. As he affixed it to his back, his feet sunk into the ground that had previously resisted. He ignored it. A few more movement followed to ensure there was no issue. There wasn't any, so he moved. Air flowed around him as he jumped. A leap took him to one of Folkvanger's tall walls, and another sent him soaring towards the city wall. One bound allowed him to hit the wall halfway up, fingers catching onto the small imperfections of the vertical wall and allowing him to leap up again. This time his hand caught the edge at the top, and he pulled himself up. From the top of the great city walls that circled Orario, he took a moment to survey the city. It was several hours before sunrise. The quietest time for Orario, which rarely fully slept. Before the sunrise that would hearken the start of the day for most early risers. Too late for the late revelers who had already fallen into exhausted slumbers. Only those like him were up. Those whose tasks would only be hindered by more people. In the pre-dawn darkness and cold, he started to jog. The distance of the wall fell away as he moved. Each step a crack from the weight he carried, muscles straining from the exertion. They did not fail though, and meters were consumed on after another. Then kilometers. Finally, the entire circumference of the labyrinth city. 1 lap. He sped up. 2 laps. He sped up. 3 laps. He sped up. The number of laps soon fell away. His mind turning instead towards his internal sense of time, tracing how much time each previous lap took. Intent on lowering that time with each new rotation. Even when he hit his top speed, each lap was treated as a new challenge to break his previous record. He did not always succeed, but that hardly matters. Faster. 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 The training hardly changed even when his breath started coming heavy, and his limbs finally cried for relief. It only added to the challenge. The rising burn that ate at his breath. The growing debilitation as his muscles weakened. It was all merely a challenge before him he had to meet. Don't stop. Faster. Don't stop. Faster. Don't stop. Faster. Eventually, the time for this came to an end. He came to a halt, presenting the sight of his breathless and sweating form. He only had one thought, however. Too light. He lifted an arm to look at the 3 magic items strapped to his wrist. Too little weight. These were specially ordered magic items. Despite all being fitted and sized for ergonomics, they were far heavier than appeared. With the ones on his limbs, waist, and in the backpack, he carried a tremendous weight. He had used them for years as a level 7. Yet, it's not enough, Otto concluded with quiet disappointment. He was level 8 now. He jumped from the walls and returned to Folkvanga, to the small side building that was Otto's own private quarters that were nestled against the wall. He landed in the small courtyard created between the quarters and the wall itself. The magic item weights were removed from his body one by one. He then stacked them again with all the ones he had available, taking a full inventory while calculating what he could in his mind. I cannot simply purchase more, he concluded quietly to himself once he decided that more would simply become unwieldy. I'll put out a reward for any improved version. These ones were already sourced from Altina and produced by mystery users, but he'd rather not add on to the array of equipment that he could no longer use productively. Despite that thought, Otto did not stop here. Even after noticing deficiency, that did not mean he couldn't still benefit. That he could allow himself to give up scratching and scraping for anything that he could do to push himself even the slightest bit higher. He picked up the strapped-together bundles of weights and started a new set of exercises inside the courtyard. It would probably be minimal. In his final 2 years as a level 7, he had only gained 134 stat points total. As a level 8, even with his basic abilities set back to I0, it was unlikely the same weights and exercises would be more valuable. Not even with increased duration and representatives. He jumped to slide his legs into a high bar set up to support massive weight, hands grabbing onto a bundle of weights, and starts hanging suit-ups. His other methods weren't much better. As a level 7, he didn't have any rivals left in Orario. No one to truly fight and test himself against on the fields of Folkvanga. Exploring the dungeon had hit its limits due to facts other than sheer strength. He could only do this. Self-training. Constantly exercised flesh. Refining skill and instinct. Level 8 changed little of that. Even with his breakthrough in the dungeon offering new options in terms of exploration, it would be limited if he couldn't break through the 71st floor that had stymied and limited those more talented than he for centuries. Head dropped the weights, shifted to hang from the bar by his hands, hooked his feet in the weight, and started hanging leg lifts instead. Arguably the greatest gain of these exercises would be helping to adapt to his new status. While the relative gain of ranking up lowered as one reached higher levels, if anything the dislocation between mind and body only increased. Lower-leveled individuals generally had rougher, less refined fighting techniques. Styles where increased strength and speed alone could be massive boosts even with less control. Once one reached the realm of first-tier adventurer though, rarely did that remain. By that point, an adventurer had years upon years of experience. Faced death and hardships more times than they could count. Years of backbreaking training to use everything they had available. Their bodies and their capabilities intimately familiar. Every move was calculated to where milliseconds and millimeters could make or break openings, even slight disruption shifting the direction of a battle. Otter might be stronger now if he fought as a beast, but paradoxically his defense would likely be easier to break now than before. Intense spars were the best way to adapt to these changes, but that was not an option for him. It was why he had chosen to head into the dungeon as soon as he leveled. He hoped that the battles there would substitute well enough, but his equipment and the vast differences in fighting monsters proved an issue. It appeared he would have to satisfy himself with a longer, harder adjustment. He moved to a handstand position, and soon started push-ups with one hand while using his feet and remaining hand to juggle weights. In the end, though, none of that mattered. The good or the bad. He'd still be doing this regardless. Putting in this effort. After all, Otter had joined rarefied ranks. Only 8 people in 1,000 years had ever reached level 8. Each a venerable and respectable individual worthy of defining their generation without question. Only one had ever reached level 9. Otter intended to be the second. Before he went further beyond still. Otter had his advantages, even if he deemed himself nothing special in regard to talent. He was not like Maxim, a sword emperor, who started as an adventurer in his 30s and became level 8 in the twilight of even a high-leveled adventurer's life. He had not used the opponents of the Glacier territory as his whetstone for level 6 and 7 like the Zeus and Hera familiars were able to. He was a solo adventurer, relying solely on his own body and skills against whatever dangers the dungeon threw at him. Yet, it would still be nothing less than stupid for someone who only had strength to expect anything. He placed every weight on a metal plate, lifted and balanced it on his shoulders before starting squats. Otter was mediocre, talent enough to sustain himself with effort but not race ahead. He understood little of so many things, blind to many things. He was not suited as a hero. Did not have the requisite emotional range or dreams of one. He had little reason for the heavens to smile down upon him. All he had was his will, and the effort that derived from that will. 134 points in 2 years. He would satisfy himself with half of that. A quarter. 55 years. That was how long she had been a level 8. How long it took for her to level up. He could not expect better, even if she had despised being an adventurer and never once sought to succeed at it. So, 2 years. 7 years, 8 years, 15, 50, 100. Otter had to be willing to work every day with the understanding that such might be the time frame he's operating on and without any guarantee of success. If he didn't, how could he expect the spirits or the goddess to accept him? Thus, Otter simply and untiringly did whatever exercises he could think of without relenting. As the sun rose, Otter's early morning workout finished. Folkvanger also woke up. As the noise of those waking and the clang of the earliest rising Einherjars beginning their baptism started ringing out, Otter dumped water over his head. The cold water straight from the tap was uncomfortable, but Otter didn't flinch at the old enemy. He merely washed as best he could from the outer tap that used to be for horses. He then changed clothes. Worn workout outfit exchanged for one of his sets of dungeon clothes. Simple, but clean. He then left his quarters in presentable form, entering the main temple of Folkvanger. "It is morning, Lady Freya." The sleeping figure let out, even that melodious. A single purple eye popped open as she asked, "Otter. On time, I assume." "Of course, Lady Freya," he answered, hand over his heart in a salute as he bowed slightly. "It is a clear morning, but slightly cold as such." "Unfortunate. Sounds a fine morning to rest in a slight bit, but Mia demanded I come in early this morning to have the midday open," she claimed even as she folding herself into her blanket more. "But I'm sure I can manage to justify being half an hour late. Maybe an hour, if someone is willing to help warm me up." "The day shall warm with the rising sun," he told her calmly. Both her eyes opened to look at me before she spoke again coquettishly. "How about you instead send someone up for me, Otter? Alan. Or maybe Van instead. I think I need someone huggable." "I shall send him up, my lady." Her eyes remained on him for several moments before she sighed and rose, allowing the blanket to fall to reveal her skimpy nightgown, as she declared, "You really aren't fun sometimes, Otter." "I apologize, my lady," he merely said in response, not understanding but not needing to in order to know he disappointed her somehow. "Is there anything I can do instead?" "No. Just send Horn and the other attendants in. I'm no longer in the mood for an indulgent morning." "Of course," Otter said as he moved back towards the door to her chambers. "Do whatever chores you need in the meantime. The appraisal is set to happen at noon, and I wish for your presence tonight when I return too. You have the morning and evening for anything else." He acknowledged that, and left her as was usual so the attendants could prepare her and Horn could be informed of plans. This was earlier than SYR usually came out, but little changed. Others were also set to guard her there. He got to work on the backlog of tasks he needed to cover after any dive into the dungeon. He started reviewing the finances and inventory of the Freya familia. Hayden handled tactical and strategic battlefield considerations, but he had no desire to act as a king by handling more. Alan handled watching and disciplining the lower members, but that was more due to no one wanting to submit to Otter unnecessarily. When it came to accounting though, no one else wanted the task so it fell to Otter. Although, it was rarely a problem. Money mattered little to the familiar members, despite having a respectable amount. Most important use was the tribute to Lady Freya. More went into the familiar vaults to purchase the equipment for the baptism, ingredients for potions, food for the cooks, maintenance for the base, etc. The Andrimni handled the food and potion ingredients, with Hythe Velvet having access to the vaults, but the rest had to be run by Otter or Alan. It left Otter moving through the familiar armories to check recent wear, setting aside the money for their long-term smithing contracts for non-executives. He then checked the base to check for damage. Ultimately, it proved mere rote action and he was able to move on to other familiar obligations. Grabbing some of the materials he had picked up in the dungeon, the less valuable ones, he placed them in a bag before proceeding to leave Folkvanger once again. This time he went northeast. Hopping on the roofs, he passed right over the entertainment district still recovering from the previous night's revels. This led him into Daedalus Street, and he navigated the convoluted streets from above, till he arrived at a modest townhouse. Alighting down before it without a sound or drawing attention, Otter entered. It opened into a shop, an open space before a large counter with shelves behind, all loaded with an array of basic potions. Naturally, the counter had someone behind it, who immediately perked up from a bored position and started. "Hello, welcome to the Morning Star, Sir Otter, how may I help you?" Otter stared down at the teenage boy that quailed, finally asking, "Is your goddess or Joseph here?" "Yes sir. I'll go get them." Otter was unmoved by the panicked retreat, merely waiting till two returned. "I would be annoyed on Eden's behalf, but I can see you did nothing beyond being yourself." Otter's throat rumbled at that, but he didn't need to find anything to say as another did. "We can discuss Eden's nervousness later, but here we should instead greet our customer." "Greetings, Otter." "Lady Orsrine," Otter said, nodding. "Joseph." Morning Star Pharmacy was the store of a business-type familiar, and the two before him were the goddess and captain. Otter's eyes ran over Joseph's prosthetic lower leg that now defined the man as an adventurer. He still gave the bald bull beastman a nod for his unflinching gaze that deserved sliver of respect. Otter's gaze then turned to the goddess of the two, noting the usual simple garb that did not take away from her beauty. The youthful glow of her skin, the shine of her golden tresses, the enticing swell of her chest under the garb that turned it into. Otter shook his head, rejecting the thoughts, and instead spoke firmly. "I bring materials for a new order." "Of course," Goddess Orsrine said with a small smile and nod. "You can just lay it out here. We obviously have your previous order ready to. Joseph, dear, if you would. I apologize for not picking them up earlier. My last two dungeon delves left distracted. I do not even know how to react to your apologizing for a dive that led to you beating the Bela and leveling up, nor for you going deep and challenging the dungeon further, as all Orario and the world desire," she retorted, smile complicated. "I shall just say that it is not an issue, and request that we move on." Otter nodded and pulled out the smaller bag he carried. Slowly withdrawing the contents, he laid them out on the counter. They were the herbs he had gathered in the large tree labyrinth. Common herbs that were the frequent target of gathering quests, used to create the next tier of healing items than the beginner ones. Nothing unusual here. All in impeccable quality as usual, Orsrine noted, lowering herself to look at them closer before sending him a significant look. "Plenty simple enough for your own familiar healers to work with. The Andrimni have other duties they are better to focus on." Of course. She probably didn't even need her divine abilities to know he was lying, although she kept quiet and accepted the partially true excuse, because both knew this was merely Freya's will. Orsrine was another goddess of beauty. One Freya preferred to most others, Orsrine lacking the high-handed nature of most deities who held that domain. Although, it had only been slight fondness. The two had little in common elsewhere. Despite both holding the domains of love and beauty, Freya also held the secondary domains of sex, fertility, and war, while Orsrine was youth, health, new beginnings. The two were quite different. It was instead something different that prompted this. Orario had come to Orario right after the Great Feud with Joseph, a former adventurer from elsewhere. After the latter had been crippled and left his previous familiar, she had managed to recruit him, valuing his support potion-making skills despite his crippling. The two had also become lovers, arriving with several adopted children. As the years passed, they also added to them by adopting more. The newly adopted children receiving her fauna, the familiar eschewing the dungeon and instead surviving solely as a potion-making business. That would have normally placed them thoroughly below the gaze of both Otter and Lady Freya, if it wasn't for where the later children had been adopted from. This meant Otter had been presented with the dilemma of how to help support a familiar like this. He couldn't make any official connection. A familiar like this would be more endangered by being tied to the Freya familiar than any minor threat would arise against such a weak familiar. Orario also wasn't the sort of deity that would accept or want funds for nothing. Eventually, Otter had hit upon this schema. Joseph returned from the back, holding a small rack of several dozen small potions. Putting them on the counter, he announced professionally, 12 high potions, and a half-dozen each of high stamina and magic potions. The request for smaller volume bottles through higher concentration was achieved, if with difficulty. We also sourced the new bottles ourselves for you, as requested. Otter grunted and did a cursory examination of them before nodding and asking, "Price?" "Taking into account that you supplied much of the raw materials," Joseph mused, checking noted before listing the price. It was high. Unsurprising, with the extra requests. While the potions were generally only a few thousand Vali each, the extra requests added on. Higher concentration for smaller bottles was a special, rarely requested, order. Sourcing new bottles for it. Otter paid it without question though. After all, that was the point. To assist the familiar, he simply brought business to them. He made regular orders, bringing in materials himself and making such requests to increase commission costs. Not like it was any troubling amount for him. More indirect than simply providing funds, but this allowed this familiar to both keep their pride and refine their potion-making skills. Otter could acknowledge that. "What about your order for these?" "Simple order of 3 high potions this time. I believe what was brought should be enough for such." "It shall," Orario confirmed. A few more exchanges were made before Otter left with everything settled. He jumped away once again, although this time stopping as soon as he was out of sight. He then pulled out a previous container of potions he had in his possession. It was a previous rack of potions from the Orario familiar. Not smaller bottles, but pushed to a higher quality. He had carried them into the dungeon, even if they were not something suitable for himself. After all, Otter rarely used potions and anything requiring such from him usually required nothing less than an elixir. He did carry lesser ones around, however. Provided them indirectly to those in the dungeon that were in trouble and put in deserving effort. Unfortunately, he was more liable to provide aid to critically wounded adventurers who had a fight worthy of respect. That usually meant elixirs. These were generally only if he found a hard-fighting group that had run out of potions, where he'd leave them in the direction they were traveling. He naturally hadn't focused on such in recent trips. The Andrimni provided the Freya familiar with higher quality products, so their inventory didn't need them. Used to this whenever he picked up a new order, Otter started moving. As he passed another townhouse he knew housed another familiar, he placed the older potions down at their back door in a flash before moving on. Daedalus Street was filled with small, struggling familiars. He tried his best to keep track of those striving valiantly, and found little reason not to leave such secret gifts. He traveled till he appeared in a construction workyard in a flash. "Where is Foreman Denon?" The supervisor Otter landed right behind jumped in shock, spinning around and demanding, "By the gods, where did you are, Sir Otter? Is there an issue?" Otter merely stared, reiterating briskly, "Foreman Denon." "I'll go fetch him," the man said, quickly scurrying off. Otter waited, ignoring the looks and whispers of his appearance, till the desired man came up shuffling and immediately sticking out a sealed envelope, saying, "Here it is, sir." Otter grunted, took it, and turned. I hope the lady goddess will approve. Why you will tell her that I've been doing my best, all right." Otter paused and sent a look over his shoulder as he said simply, "I do not guide the goddess' thoughts, but I shall deliver your letter to her. She shall decide what grace to bestow." The man thanked him, but Otter was already gone. He repeated this process several times. Construction yards, guilds, shops, food providers, all provided Otter envelopes, and he then left. All were believers of Freya, following her will. These men and women simply were well-placed believers who could act on her behalf in private endeavors. Agents, with the envelopes merely being their progress and status reports. In this case, towards providing support to Daedalus Street with funds from her tribute, advancing her desires and purposes there, but never so close or directly as to ruin her fun. Not the concern of Otter, though. He would only deliver these letters, accepting it as a private endeavor of Lady Freya. He just made it his task to collect them. It also left him done with his tasks as captain, and now able to return to Folkvanga. This would be all for today, next part coming soon, so please like, share, and subscribe to get informed as soon as the next part drops.